They're in my car. I'll bring you back here afterward to get your car." He grimaced slightly when she looked at him quizzically. "I don't know if you've noticed, but these days any unaccompanied man moving around the city tends to draw quite a few suspicious stares, especially in a neighborhood such as the one we'll be visiting. Aside from disliking the way it makes me feel, I just as soon avoid the undue attention." Maggie half nodded and went with him to his car, and it wasn't until they were on their way that she said, "It's the not knowing, of course. As far as most of the women in this city are concerned, any man they don't know could be the rapist, and sad to say, there are probably far too many women who aren't even sure of the men they do know." "That is sad. It must be hell to look at someone you believe you could trust and realize you aren't completely sure anymore. And hell to be on the receiving end of that doubt." "I imagine so." He glanced at her. "Imagine? Can't you feel it? When they do, I mean?" "Why ask when you don't believe it's possible?" Maggie made her voice a little dry, but still casual. "Is that why you wanted me to go with you to the Mitchell house, by the way? So you could watch another performance and explain it away?" John was silent for a moment, then said, "I hate it when Quentin's right. He said you'd probably lived with doubt and disbelief most of your life." "He'd know, being a seer. Not that you believe that, either." She realized abruptly that they weren't heading for the address of the Mitchell house Andy had provided, but in another direction entirely. "Where?" "That's an old-fashioned term for it, isn't it? Seer." Maggie shrugged, feeling a slow little chill crawl over her skin. "I suppose. Anyway, he said he didn't see things, just knew them." "And you?" "What about me?" She clung to casual disinterest and fought the rising panic. John drew a breath and said softly, "When you walk through a place where something violent happened, do you see things? Know them? Or feel them?" Repeating her earlier answer, Maggie said, "Why ask when you don't believe it's possible?" "I never have believed it's possible, but that doesn't mean I can't change my mind, Maggie. Not long before I called Andy and found out about the Mitchell woman, Quentin told me another woman had been taken. He knew." "I'm sure you explained that away. It could have been a lucky guess." She knew where they were going now. Damn! Damn! "It could have been, but if so, there have been a lot of lucky guesses over the years. Too many times he knew things before he should have. And then there's you." Stolidly, Maggie said, "I'm just overly sensitive, that's all, with a vivid imagination." "I guess you've heard that a lot during your life." "Enough." "Okay, but at least I'm trying to have an open mind. Give me that much credit." After a moment, she said quietly, "I'm sure you use calculators and computers and other machines in your business affairs. Do you really have to understand the nuts and bolts of how they work in order to be satisfied with the information and answers they provide?" "No, but I have to trust that the information they provide is accurate and reliable, and sometimes that requires at least some level of understanding. And you're not a machine. I really do want to understand you, Maggie." Deliberately, Maggie half-turned in the seat to look at him steadily. "If your friend Quentin hasn't convinced you in years of trying to, then what hope do I have? At least the things he tells you can be verified, predictions backed up by fact when those predictions turn out to be true. But what I do isn't backed up by anything, really. It's all subjective. Besides, I don't have the spare energy to jump through hoops for you, John. Just tell yourself I have a peculiar skill honed by half a lifetime of working with the police, and let it go at that. I can't prove anything to you." "Can't you?" "No." He pulled the car over to the curb and stopped, then looked at her, his jaw tight. I know a way you can. She didn't have to look to know where they were. No, I can't. Because the interview with Hollis took too much out of you? She had to be honest. No. Because you have to save your energy for the Mitchell house? Partly. He nodded as if an inner belief had been confirmed. But not completely. So what's the rest of the answer, Maggie? Andy told me you never walked through Christina's apartment after she died. Why not? Maggie drew a short breath. I have my reasons. Reasons he wouldn't understand, let alone believe. What reasons? Private reasons. Maggie, John, I'm not going to walk through Christina's apartment. Not today. And you won't tell me why? She shook her head slightly in a brief but final negation. I'm trying to understand this, he said, his voice slow, as though he chose his words carefully. Because it's such a simple question. Maggie, why did my sister kill herself? I think you could answer that question, so I have to wonder why you won't even make an attempt. Am I asking so much? Just walk through her apartment and tell me what you see. Or know. Or feel. Andy hung up his phone and scowled at Jennifer as she approached his desk. Please tell me you have something, he begged. She sat down and said, We didn't expect forensics to find anything, especially not this quick. So something else must have put you in a bad mood. Or somebody. Drummond? If anything, Andy's frown deepened. I don't know whether to look forward to the day he's sitting in the governor's mansion or dread it. He'd be mostly out of my hair, but God help the state. Let me guess. Samantha Mitchell or her husband has a very important friend in government? Hell, they know everybody, at least according to Luke. And everybody is yelling at him to find the lady. Pronto. I guess you told him we're trying to do that. I mentioned it, yeah. Jennifer smiled. Well, here's something else to brighten your day. He braced himself visibly. What? While Scott's trying to track down those missing files, I've been taking a closer look at that book I got from the library. There aren't a lot of specific details on the series of murders in 1934, but there was one very interesting thing. It turns out the cops were undecided whether to call it 6 victims or 8. 6 was the official verdict, but there was a lot of doubt, apparently, among the investigating officers. What kind of doubt? They were positive the first 6 victims were killed by the same man because of the similarities. The women were always raped and killed somewhere else and their bodies dumped later in remote or deserted spots. He always beat them up badly. The women always bore defense injuries, and he never tore their clothing. Andy blinked. Never? No. The bodies were always discovered dressed, all the buttons fastened and nothing ripped, which is interesting in several ways. For one thing, the women were always found without underwear. No bras or panties, no girdles or stockings or slips, just their outer dresses, and there was usually very little blood or dirt on those dresses. So he stripped them, and then dressed them afterward, but without their underwear. Kept the underwear as trophies, maybe? Maybe. But think how difficult just the mechanics of it had to be. By the time he finished with them, the women were either dead or dying, and instead of dumping them somewhere, naked, which would certainly have been the easiest and simplest thing to do, he takes the time and trouble to dress them in their outer clothing, almost as if he was trying to protect their modesty. "You've been talking to the shrink?" Andy wanted to know. No, but I've listened to her talk about this sort of thing before, so I feel safe in making a semi-educated guess about it. I think the detail is important, Andy. It could be something as simple as the fact that the 1934 killer lived during a more modest time, or a quirk of his psyche. He'd defile them in every way possible, but it was for his own enjoyment. When other men saw the women, they had to be decently covered. Sounds like the sort of quirk entirely likely in one of these twisted bastards. Okay, it makes sense to me. It definitely sounds like those 6 women were killed by the same man. But there was doubt about 2 more victims? Uh-huh. Why? The M.O. was drastically different? 2 young women found in remote places, having obviously been raped and killed somewhere else, badly beaten, with defense injuries, and wearing their virtually undamaged outer clothing all neatly fastened. Sounds like the same guy. Yeah, except for one addition. Which is? Their eyes were missing. Cut out, with absolutely no finesse. Andy stared at her a moment, then drew a short breath. Shit. Yeah. Knowing what we know now about the escalation and evolution of this sort of sick predator, I say those last 2 victims belong with the first 6. He had just grown more violent and more creative. Which means 8, Andy. Killed within the space of about 18 months. Which may or may not mean we could have a year and 4, or 3, more victims to go. If our guy is copycatting earlier crimes, yeah. The killings that started in 1934 sure sound familiar. All of our victims survived the attacks, and only 1 actually died of her injuries. But that could be just as much luck as anything else. They were found before they could bleed to death, unlike the women in 1934. We have naked victims, but that may just be because our particular monster has fewer hang-ups than his predecessor did, or a better knowledge of forensics. He certainly has that, Andy said heavily, and it does sound more and more like he studied at least some of these earlier crimes. For inspiration. God damn his soul. He doesn't have one, Jen declared. Andy grunted in agreement. What about the earlier date? 1894. Nothing so far, at least in that book. And we haven't found any files from that year. Not here and not at any other station. It was a long time ago, Andy. Tell me about it. He sighed. All we can do is keep looking. What else have we got? Jennifer sighed and got to her feet. Yeah, you're right. By the way, I know we're keeping this to ourselves for the time being, but are you going to tell Maggie? I haven't decided yet. What do you think? I say tell her. Andy leaned back and looked at her curiously. Why? Because Maggie works best when she has all the information we can give her. And because she's very good with intangibles, Andy. Victims give her subjective impressions and feelings and pain. And in all that confusion, Maggie finds a face we can search for. As far as I can tell, with her it's all instinct and emotion. She comes at this differently than we do. Maybe she'd have an idea or observation we'd never have. Yeah. He nodded slowly. Yeah, maybe. You going to tell Garrett? I don't know that yet either. It might give him a focus other than his sister's death. It might. And we might need the resources he can tap. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. I'm glad it's your decision and not mine, Jennifer told him with a casual salute, then returned to her own desk. Andy wished it was somebody else's decision. He was a good cop, and maybe it was that inborn instinct that warned him uneasily that this particular case was somehow beyond his experience. Not just because this bastard was torturing his victims the way he was and going to such elaborate extremes to hide his own identity, but because of the chillingly methodical way he went about satisfying his twisted needs. Andy would have loved to hand the whole mess over to somebody else, but he couldn't do that. It was his mess, and he had to find his way through it, which meant Jen was right, and he'd have to tell Maggie about these latest puzzle pieces. Even more, he might just have to break the rules and ignore Drummond's orders and bring John Garrett fully into the investigation. He needed all the resources he could get his hands on, and with Drummond's stubborn refusal to call in the FBI, John could provide a wide and willing conduit to virtually every database and source of information available. Maybe even some sources that could take them all the way back to 1894.
Maggie wondered if he had any idea at all what he asked of her, and thought that he had at least an inkling, but not belief. Because if he believed, he could never have asked her to go to the apartment where a despondent, tormented woman had killed herself and allow those emotions to seep into her. At least, she hoped he couldn't have asked that of her. "Even if I did, it wouldn't be proof," she said flatly, "because Christina isn't here to verify whatever I'd say."
"I'll know if it's the truth."
"Will you? And how will you know that? Because you were her brother? You've lived in L.A. for the last 10 years, and she moved back to Seattle more than 5 years ago. Did you know so much about her life? I'd bet not. I'd bet you didn't know much at all. Maggie. She volunteered at a daycare center in her neighborhood. Did you know that? And at the local animal shelter. She still woke up in the night and reached for her husband, even though it had been nearly 2 years since he died. She talked to her plants, even sang to them sometimes. She was learning to use a computer for the first time. With Simon gone, she no longer felt she'd have to compete with his genius in that area. She watched old movies in bed at night, and just before the attack she'd been in the middle of a wonderful series of mystery novels. Maggie drew a breath. Did you know that? Did you know any of that? John stared out through the windshield, a muscle moving in his tight jaw. "No," he said finally. "I didn't know any of that." Looking down at the sketch pad in her lap, Maggie consciously loosened her grip on it. She really needed to stop clinging, she thought vaguely. It was a very bad sign. "John, if I believed, really believed I could help you by going to Christina's apartment, then I would. But nothing I could find out by doing that would help you in any way. Assuming I survived to tell you." But she didn't add that, of course. Quietly, she said, "We should try to get to the Mitchell house while the cops are still there." Without a word, John put the car in gear and pulled away from the curb. Maggie didn't sense any hostility coming from him, so she didn't worry about his silence. Instead, she used the time granted to her to do her best to shore up what few defenses she had. Not that she ever had many, except for a fair ability to master her expression in what Beau referred to as her prickly, touch-me-not posture. So she worked on those, at least for the 10 minutes or so until they reached the Mitchell house. The police had tried to keep this disappearance as quiet as possible until they knew whether Samantha Mitchell had been abducted by the serial rapist, but the press had found out at least part of it and were milling about just beyond the long drive, where several uniformed officers were holding them at bay. Andy had sent word of their clearance, so they were waved through and pulled into the driveway with barely a pause. But with enough of a pause, unfortunately, for one photographer to get a picture. "Shit," John muttered. Maggie, who had done her best to make certain her face wouldn't be visible, said, "You'll make the papers tomorrow. I wonder if Andy realized that seeing you here would pretty much confirm the reporter's suspicions about this woman being the latest victim." "It won't be an official confirmation, so all they can do is speculate. That isn't what's bothering me." "Then what?" "Drummond." John sent her a wry look. "He wasn't happy I was granted access to the investigation, and I more or less promised to keep my involvement low-key." "Ouch." "Yeah." Without saying anything else about that, John parked the car and they got out. It was a big Spanish-style house in an upper-middle-class neighborhood where virtually every house had its own unique style. Manicured lawn, exquisite landscaping. Maggie glanced around as they made their way through the tangle of police vehicles clogging the upper part of the driveway, and murmured, "Wouldn't you think a stranger would be noticed in this neighborhood?" "I'd think so, yeah. Unless he was dressed as some kind of maintenance or service person, hiding in plain sight." Maggie knew the cops had undoubtedly made a note of that possibility. Neither Andy nor any of his people were stupid. But it nevertheless struck her as distinctly odd that a rapist who went to such lengths to hide his identity from his victims could allow himself to move openly in neighborhoods and shopping malls where he was almost certain to be noticed, even hiding in plain sight. The cop at the door said they'd been okayed to go through the house, and since the forensics team was packing up now, they could come in whenever they wanted. "Where's Mr. Mitchell?" Maggie asked.
"He's in the kitchen with a couple of detectives."
Maggie nodded and stepped past him into the foyer. Several equipment boxes standing open and closed on the polished wood floor of the area attested to the presence of the forensics team, and an occasional voice could be heard from upstairs. It appeared they had finished their work downstairs. She was momentarily highly conscious of John standing just behind her, but forced herself to concentrate on what she was here to do. It was difficult to prepare herself for the painful and disturbing invasion, even after all these years, especially when she could hear the forensics team. One of the reasons she always tried to delay a walkthrough of the scene until after everyone else had finished their work and gone was because the emotions of other people could affect what she was trying to do. One of the reasons.
"There's no blood trail here." John's voice was matter-of-fact. "So where do you start?"
She glanced at him, wishing she didn't have to prove herself to him this way. But if he couldn't accept and believe this, how would he ever be able to accept and believe the rest? And no matter which way it went, he'd have to believe the rest. Wouldn't he? Making up her mind abruptly, Maggie abandoned the "I'm just an overly sensitive person" mantra. "I'm a human divining rod for violence," she said, matching his tone. "If there was any here, I'll find where it happened." He was completely expressionless.
"I see."
"I doubt it." Maggie hugged her sketch pad like the security blanket it virtually was and walked into the living room on her left. She didn't look at the comfortable and expensive furnishings or pay any attention to the decorating scheme, but just stood in the center of the room, closed her eyes for a moment, and reluctantly opened the inner door to that unnerving sixth sense. As always, it was a peculiar feeling. At first a distant murmur accompanied by flashes of scenes, like a strobe projector flickering images in her mind's eye. Then she caught the whiff of wine, the acrid smell of wood smoke, cologne, or aftershave. Heard voices raised suddenly in an argument, felt her hand sting as if she'd slapped someone, then hands gripping her wrists and a mouth coming down hard on hers. Maggie took a jerky step backward to physically break the connection, and under her breath muttered, "Shit." "What?" John was watching her intently, a tiny frown between his brows. She glanced at the fireplace, where no fire burned today, then looked at the apparently very comfortable couch and sighed. "There's violence, and then there's violence. Damn it, I hate being a voyeur."
"Maggie, what are you talking about?"
"Nothing was done in this room against anyone's will, John. I just picked up on, well, let's just say the Mitchells have an active and energetic sex life." He glanced at the couch as she had done, then looked quickly back at her face. "Oh." Maggie didn't try to read his face or his emotions or waste time wondering if he believed her. She was reasonably sure he didn't. Instead, she moved into the next room. She didn't stop now, but walked slowly, looking around her, but allowing that inner sense to be the one seeing, and hearing, and feeling. She caught the flicker of another marital argument in the den that seemed to be about, of all things, a parrot. Another scene of rather violent love-making in the sunroom, and knew someone had been cut, oddly enough by a broken mirror, in the breakfast room. In Thomas Mitchell's study, many business arguments had taken place, the most recent of which had been between Mitchell and his father-in-law. Maggie reported each event calmly and without looking at John, speaking aloud as much to keep herself grounded as to supply him with information. She was holding on to her control with all her will, determined not to allow herself to be lost within the emotional turmoil of these people's lives. It was getting more and more difficult to keep herself separate and apart from what she sensed, and that frightened her more than a little. Could she actually get lost in the violence of past events? And if she did, would she ever be able to find her way out again? They bypassed the kitchen, where they could hear the murmur of voices, and moved on to the other ground-floor rooms. There was nothing of interest to report in a powder room or exercise room, a butler's pantry or laundry room. Maggie was beginning to wonder if everybody had got it wrong and Samantha Mitchell had walked out of this house of her own free will, when they reached the game room. Maggie walked into the fairly dark room and was staggered by an overwhelming wave of absolute terror. It was as brief as it was fierce, just cold terror and iron arms around her and the bitter bite of chloroform. And then darkness, so intense it was as if she had fallen into an abyss. Maggie! She came out of it abruptly, shaken. It was John's arms she felt around her then, holding her upright, and the terrifying darkness receded, leaving only the bone-deep cold behind. And the terrible certainty. "He's got her," she whispered. Chapter 8. In what had once been an ordinary conference room of a New Orleans police station, now transformed by bulletin boards and computers and stacks of files into the base of operations for a very unique task force, Special Agent Tony Hart refilled his coffee cup and then returned to brooding over the photographs pinned to the center bulletin board. "I just don't see a pattern," he announced. "Look again." Tony sighed. "Boss, I've looked so often and so hard my eyes are starting to cross." Special Agent Noah Bishop looked up from the laptop where he'd been working and said dryly, "Maybe you'll be able to see better that way." "Personally, I think we've been hexed." Bishop lifted an eyebrow. "Hexed," Tony insisted firmly. "That source of yours down in the quarter talked about voodoo, and I think we should pay attention to her." "I think you need a vacation, Tony." "Oh, come on! Is it so much easier to believe in telepathy and precognition than in hexes?" "Yes." "Why?" "Telepathy and precognition don't involve fashioning a doll out of burlap and human hair and sticking pins in it." Tony pondered that for a moment. "I don't know, boss. I've seen some pretty weird things since I started working for you." "Next, you'll be seeing zombies." "I could state the obvious," Tony observed, eyeing his boss pointedly. "But I won't." Bishop didn't rise to the bait. "Hand me that file on the banker, will you?" Tony handed it across the conference table. "Anyway, if you and Miranda could just have a vision and help us out a little, I'd really appreciate it. Try, why don't you?" The words were barely out of his mouth when Bishop paled and closed his eyes, and an indrawn breath hissing between his teeth. Tony watched him intently and had to wait at least a minute or two longer than was customary before the other man's unusually penetrating gray eyes opened. Hopeful, he asked, "About our case?" "Shit." Bishop massaged his temples briefly, then raked his fingers through his black hair, slightly disarranging the vivid white streak over his left temple. He looked decidedly grim. "Who the hell gave Quentin permission to go to Seattle?" he demanded. Tony blinked. "Not about our case, then." "Beats me. I thought his and Kendra's last assignment was in Pittsburgh." "It was. But they aren't there now, typing up their reports like good little agents. They're in Seattle, and up to their asses in trouble." Bishop looked toward the doorway, and an instant later a tall, raven-haired, and strikingly beautiful woman appeared. She was absently massaging one temple with her fingers, and her startling blue eyes went instantly to Bishop. "Out loud," Tony requested automatically. She looked at him, sighed, then came to the conference table and sat down. "We can't go out there," she reminded Bishop. "Not yet, anyway." "I know." "He can take care of himself. Kendra, too. You trained them well."
"Maybe, but this... Jesus Christ. Why do I put up with him? Can you tell me that?" Bishop asked.
"Because he's good. A good investigator and a strong psychic. Too good to lose, even if he does sometimes try your patience."
Bishop shook his head grimly. "Be that as it may, Miranda. It's taken us years to get this unit on its feet and earn enough respect from law enforcement and the Bureau to be taken seriously. Far from gaining the autonomy we want, one major public screw-up and we'll find ourselves chained to our desks doing background checks for security clearances. And any time we stick our noses in where they aren't wanted, we run a huge risk of political fallout as well. Quentin knows damn well we don't get involved unofficially in ongoing investigations."
She smiled slightly. "You mean like the one you got involved in a couple of years ago in Atlanta?"
"That was different."
"Was it? Kane's your friend. John Garrett is Quentin's friend. We should have expected it, you know. Once Garrett's sister became a victim out there, it was only a matter of time before Quentin had to get involved, officially or unofficially." Tony, who had been listening intently, decided he was up to speed at last and ventured a comment.
"That serial rapist? Lots in the papers about the case."
Miranda looked at him, still smiling. "And what are you doing reading the Seattle newspapers?"
"Caught." Tony grimaced and said, "Shit," under his breath, then tried to brazen it out. "Look, I didn't know for sure what was going on. It's just that Kendra had made a modem request for some data, and the return tag said Seattle, so I figured—" "And you didn't think we'd be interested?" Bishop demanded. He shook his head. "Jesus, Tony, you're as bad as Quentin is. Keeping you two even marginally under control is like trying to herd cats." Tony grinned. "Maybe you should stop trying, boss."
"They do tend to land on their feet," Miranda observed. "Although what I can't figure out is how either of them believes they can hide anything for long in a unit run by a telepath."
"Eternal optimists. Both of us."
"And you're both convinced you can charm your way out of trouble?"
"Only because we usually do," Tony said guilelessly. Bishop groaned.
"Don't waste your energy," Miranda advised him, still amused. "You'll never fit either of them into any kind of FBI mold."
"I wasn't going for that," Bishop confessed, staring at Tony. "I seldom hope for miracles, just something reasonable, like occasional obedience to my so-called authority. Not very much to ask, I'd think."
"Would it make you feel better," Tony inquired, "if I said I'd always considered you an authority figure?
I mean, I do call you boss, after all." "Only to remind yourself that's what I am. Otherwise, you'd never remember."
"Hey, you're the one who always says psychics are a prickly, independent lot, prone to go it alone more often than follow the rules or the regs.
Can I help it if Quentin and I fit your definition to a T?" "You could at least pretend to follow the rules every once in a while."
"Oh, I do."
"Every once in a while?"
Tony's smile died, and he added quietly,
"Okay, you've both done a dandy job of trying to lead me away from asking about your vision."
"Not so dandy," Miranda murmured.
"I'm also tenacious," Tony reminded her. "So what is it you're trying very hard not to tell me?"
Miranda exchanged a glance with Bishop, then said, We need you here, Tony. I know that. I won't go herring off after Quentin and Kendra, no matter what you tell me. Like you said, they can take care of themselves. But he could feel tension seeping into his muscles, and when he looked at Miranda, he had the sudden, disquieting idea that she knew. And if she knew... It was Bishop who said, "They're into something a lot more complicated than they realize." "A fairly common trait of investigations we get involved in," Tony said, trying not to think about how much both of them knew about things he would have preferred to keep to himself. "So what did you see?" Miranda said, "Sometimes visions are as clear and distinct as if they're scenes from a movie, a story with a beginning, a middle, and an ending. But sometimes they aren't. Sometimes they're flashes of stop-motion images, out of sequence, all jumbled together. Even worse, instead of presenting a single prediction, they can be variations on a theme, possible outcomes to a complex, fluid situation." Tony scowled. "Meaning you don't know exactly what's going to happen out there, but at least one possible outcome is a bad one." "No," she said softly. "Meaning only one possible outcome is a good one. The deck's stacked against them this time, Tony. Against all of them." "We have to warn them." Tony spoke before he considered, and wasn't surprised by Bishop's response. "You know better than that. In the kind of situation they're in, any foreknowledge, especially from outside, could trigger the very events we want to avoid. We can't help them by telling them what may or may not happen. They have to make their own choices, their own decisions, based on what's happening at any given time and based on their own abilities, paranormal or otherwise. Anything else is virtually guaranteed to only make things worse." "Then what the hell good is it to even be precognitive?" Tony demanded. Bishop smiled wryly. "Who told you it was a good thing? You've been listening to fairy tales again, Tony." "Shit." Tony drew a breath. "So we say nothing? We leave them to fate?" Miranda said, "Fate's a very big player in this one, and some things really do have to play out as they're meant to. So, yes, we leave them to fate. We don't have a choice." Tony looked from one to the other of them, then said with forced lightness, "I guess this is where I demonstrate my ability to obey orders and follow the rules, huh?" "I'm afraid so," Bishop said. "Okay. Well, then, if you two don't mind, I think I'll go see how Sharon is coming with that autopsy." He didn't wait for approval, but left the conference room briskly. Bishop said, "You know he's rattled when he voluntarily observes an autopsy." "He hates them." "Yeah, this isn't going to be easy for him." Miranda hesitated. "Are we right to keep him away?" Bishop sighed explosively. "Hell, I don't know. You saw the same thing I did. That whole situation's so damn precarious, one player too many turns it into a bloodbath. Quentin and Kendra are involved now. There's nothing we can do to change that. Pull them out, and we could make things immeasurably worse. Go in ourselves, and the same thing could happen. And, like you said, this one's about fate. We'll have to leave them all to find their destiny." "They'll make it," Miranda said through the telepathic link they shared. "I hope so. But I found fate to be a brutal master. Even if they do make it, they'll never be the same again." Her hand reached across the table, and their fingers twined together in a gesture neither of them had to comment on. No matter how intimately minds touched, sometimes the only real comfort to be found was in the warmth of flesh touching flesh. Maggie turned off her cell phone and returned it to her pocket. Andy said he'd have the forensics team go over the game room again, just to be sure. Apparently they didn't find much the first time, but he said they were figuring she was grabbed in the kitchen or front hall. "So he believed you when you told him Samantha Mitchell was attacked in that room?
Yes, he believed me. Experience has taught him to trust my instincts.
They were sitting in John's car, still parked at the curb in front of the Mitchell house, and he made no move to start the engine. Instead, turned slightly in the driver's seat. He watched her intently. You haven't shown him what you've shown me, have you? Why not? Maggie was trying very hard not to shiver visibly, but the cold weariness she felt was getting harder and harder to ignore. She just wanted to go home and soak in a hot tub, maybe listen to some peaceful music and simply try to forget for a while. Why not? John repeated.
Because it wasn't necessary,
she answered, almost too tired to think. All Andy ever needed from me was sketches, and he could believe what I gave him without questioning where it came from, because I'd proven he could believe it. So I need more from you? For a moment, Maggie was tempted to tell him what a loaded question that really was. Instead, she abruptly opened her sketch pad and turned to a certain page and stood the pad up on her lap so he could see the sketch. John caught his breath. It was a sketch of Christina, as she'd been before the attack that had ruined her face and destroyed her life. This face he stared at was, John realized dimly, more than simple charcoal lines on ivory paper. Much more. The pale brown hair, straight and cut casually mid-length, surrounded a delicate oval face that was unusually pretty, with large sparkling eyes and a beautiful smile with a deep dimple on one side. It was his sister as he remembered her. So vividly alive he expected her to laugh suddenly, or cut her eyes sideways at him the way she always had when she found him amusing, or he tried her considerable patience when he was, as she put it, being Big Brother. Jesus, he murmured. Maggie tore the sketch neatly from the pad and handed it to him. If this was all you needed from me, you wouldn't have to believe anything beyond what you understand. I knew your sister. I drew her likeness. There it is. I'm an artist. It's what artists do. Nothing paranormal about it. I'm not so sure, John said, handling the sketch carefully. But thank you for this.
You're welcome. Do you mind if we leave now? I know you wanted me to go with you to talk to your friend Quentin at this command post you guys have set up, but I need to be home for a while first. I'm a little tired.
John looked at her for a moment, then nodded. Quentin said you probably needed to spend time at home alone whenever one of these events tired you.
Quentin was right.
He got his briefcase from the back seat and secured the sketch carefully inside before starting the car. It was several miles before he spoke again, and then it was to ask a slow question. So what more do I need from you?
She didn't hesitate. Answers.
About Christina?
About all of it. You want to know why she killed herself, but more than that. You want to find the man who destroyed her life, and...
He frowned. And? Maggie stared out through the windshield. Was Beau right about this man? He was usually right. And if he was right, she had to be very, very careful. Maggie?
And you want him to pay for what he did. You may not fully believe there's anything paranormal about my work, but you do believe I can help you find this rapist.
After a moment, he said slowly, Why do I think that isn't what you were originally going to say? She was silent. Okay, then tell me this. How is it you're so sure Samantha Mitchell was abducted by this serial rapist? Abducted, I'll buy. But how can you know it was him?
Maggie hesitated, then said deliberately,
Because it felt like him. You don't mean felt emotionally, do you? No. It physically felt like him. When he grabbed her from behind, the feel of his arms around her, his chest against her back, the way he rubbed himself against her as she struggled, were all just the same as with the other attacks. You felt that because they did? Yes. When you interviewed them? When they relived those memories? She nodded. Did you go to the places the other women had been abducted from? Only one of them. Laura Hughes was abducted from her high-security apartment building, so I was able to do a walk through there. But the others were grabbed either in very public places or places where there had been far too many people around later. It would have muddied the impressions. Impressions? Dryly, she said, "What do you expect me to call them? Psychic vibes?" You flatly denied being psychic just the other day. Yeah, well, that's always the safe thing to do. At least until I get to know whoever's asking. He shot her a quick look. Is that why you're finally being honest with me? Well, I thought it might avoid a game of 20 questions. Obviously, I was wrong. That surprised a laugh out of him. Okay, point taken. It's just that I really do want to understand, Maggie. And believe? He barely hesitated. And believe. It's just so far outside my experience that I know virtually nothing about it. You don't like not knowing, do you? No, I don't. So I ask questions. Maggie waited until he turned the car into the police lot where she'd left her own to say, I really don't mind questions, John. But my brain isn't working too clearly at the moment, and I'd rather postpone them, if it's all the same to you. He pulled into the slot beside her car. Will you come to the hotel later? I still think we should sit down and go over everything with Quentin and his partner, come up with some kind of game plan from here on out. Partner? John swore under his breath, wondering if Maggie's apparent psychic abilities included being able to make him say things he had no intention of saying. Yes, his partner. He's a cop, isn't he? Maggie had one hand on the door handle, but was waiting, brows slightly raised. Quentin's a cop. He's here unofficially, Maggie. Aha. What kind of cop? Federal. John answered reluctantly. FBI. Oh, lovely. And if Drummond finds out? Then everything hits the fan. But I'm hoping he won't find out, at least until we have something to help his people put this bastard behind bars for the rest of his miserable life. Maggie shook her head. You do like to live dangerously. Maybe. Will you come to the hotel later? She didn't think there was a maybe about it, but was too tired to worry much about it at the moment. Look, I'll see how I feel in a couple of hours and let you know, okay? I still have your cell number. He nodded, but turned the car off and got out when she did, saying, I want to talk to Andy for a few minutes. Maggie unlocked her car door and said calmly, Do you want me to write down the stuff I told you at the Mitchell house so Andy can try to verify it for you? John stood on the walkway a few feet away, staring at her. Shit. Was I that obvious? Let's just say I'm beginning to understand the way you think. He smiled slightly. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I'll let you know. He half laughed. Fair enough. No, you don't have to write anything down. As it happens, I have a very good memory. Now, that doesn't surprise me at all. See you later, John. She got into her car and closed the door. She started the engine, watching him walk toward the station, and muttered under her breath, FBI. Great. Just great. Andy hung up the phone and frowned across his desk at John. "Okay, I checked. And, as you heard, an understandably bewildered Thomas Mitchell confirmed. He and his wife did have an argument in their den about a parrot last week. His wife did cut herself on a hand mirror in the breakfast room the week before that. And he and his father-in-law did have a rather loud discussion about business in his study just the other day. Now, I've left the poor bastard wondering if somebody's got him bugged. I'm wondering, too." John tried to head him off. "I've got to know more about the parrot. Why'd they fight about that?" "Samantha Mitchell wanted one as a pet," Andy answered impatiently. "John, who won the fight?" "She did. The bird's on order. John, how the hell did you know about this stuff?" He hesitated, but only briefly. There really wasn't another explanation, and besides, John had a hunch that if any one of these cops could accept Maggie totally, no matter how bizarre her talent seemed to be, it would be Andy. "I know," he answered finally, "because Maggie told me, while she was walking through the Mitchell house." Andy didn't even blink. "So she is psychic, huh? Well, I always thought so." "I'm still not 100% convinced," John said, "but I have to admit she's been pretty damned impressive. I was just a step behind her when she walked into the Mitchells' game room, and I'll swear whatever she was experiencing nearly knocked her to her knees. She says the attacker felt a certain way, his arms, his body behind her, and she claims to have felt those same physical traits when the victims she interviewed relived their attacks." "Jesus," Andy murmured. "If she felt that, then she must have felt the rest. All that pain and fear. I knew she was strong, but I had no idea just how strong." John studied him. "You don't doubt that, do you? That she really feels what she says she does?" "No, I don't doubt it." Andy drew a deep breath and let it out slowly. "About 2 years ago, we had what looked like a simple case of a runaway teenager. Normally, I wouldn't even have been involved, but the parents were political players in the city, and the chief wanted his best people looking for their 15-year-old daughter. So we interviewed dozens of her friends, trying to establish when and how she might have run away. Maggie sat in on the interviews because the chief asked her to, but she never asked a question, just listened. When we were done, none of us had a clue where that girl might be, but everything, and I mean everything, pointed to her having simply packed up some things and left home. Even the shrink agreed. So what happened? We'd spent the better part of 2 days interviewing the friends, and afterward Maggie asked if she could walk around the girl's house and the yard. Well, we'd been all through the house. Forensics had been over it, and I didn't hold out much hope Maggie could find something all of us had missed. I think they call that hubris, don't they?" John smiled slightly. "She found something?" "You could say that. I knew by then, of course, that she preferred to walk a scene alone, so I was keeping my distance. I was standing out near the garage and hadn't realized she'd come back outside until I saw her near the patio. She was walking very slowly, apparently not looking at anything in particular. When she got to the edge of the yard, she just stood there for the longest time. I didn't realize at first that she was crying, but it eventually dawned on me. I figured she was just upset about the missing girl, and I didn't want to embarrass her by calling attention to it, so I went to the car and waited. She came back a few minutes later, and except for a little red around her eyes, she looked the same as always. I asked if she'd found anything, and she said no. Then, about halfway back to the station, she started talking about the interviews. She said something about one of the older boys bothered her. Nothing she could put her finger on, mind you, just a hunch. Wondered if I'd mind calling him back in for another talk, if maybe she could ask him a question or two. I wasn't looking forward to telling the chief we had squat for leads, so I said sure, why not? The boy wasn't a suspect, and since he was 18, we didn't have to interview him in the presence of his parents, but we did tell him he could have a lawyer if he wanted one. He didn't. I asked him a few questions, then Maggie started talking to him. Just talking to him, quiet and gentle. About his school and his parents, about the girl. When Andy fell silent, John said, "She got him to confess." Andy nodded. It took nearly an hour, and by the time he finally told the truth, he was bawling his eyes out. The girl was supposed to meet him in the woods for what had become a regular session. Only that night she'd had a fight with her parents and decided to run away. To him. So she'd packed a bag, left a note for her parents, and there she was, expecting him to take care of her. He hadn't bargained on having a 15-year-old hung around his neck for life, and he panicked. They argued, and at some point he shoved her. When she fell, she hit her head on a rock. She didn't get back up. He had a shovel in his car. The gardeners had been doing landscaping around the yard, and the ground was soft, covered with a dense layer of pine mulch. It was all too horribly easy, he said, to bury her and her little suitcase right there. Andy sighed. Right there. Not 10 feet away from where I watched Maggie stand and cry. She knew. She knew exactly what had happened to that girl. There wasn't a sign to be seen, a clue to be found. But she knew. You never told her what you'd seen? No. Figured if she wanted me to know, she'd tell me. It seemed to me it was the sort of thing that would be difficult to live with, so I guessed she was used to coming up with other explanations for the things she knew. Andy looked at the other man steadily. It was fine by me. I'd learned to trust her by then. And to be perfectly honest, I don't give a damn if she reads tea leaves or peers into a crystal ball. In 5 years and hundreds of tough cases, I've never known her to be wrong. Never? Never. Oh, there have been times when she was no closer to an answer than we were, but whenever Maggie got one of her hunches, I knew damn well the case was about to break. John shook his head slightly. I don't know what I believe, except that whatever Maggie experiences is obviously very real to her. So why does she do it? Why does she put herself through this kind of trauma, this kind of suffering? You asked me that last week, more or less. I don't know the answer, John, but I'm willing to bet that if you ever find out what it is, you'll have the key to understanding Maggie Barnes. Chapter 9. Despite what she'd told John, Maggie hadn't intended to go back out on Monday evening, not after the day she'd had. But a couple of hours' rest, a hot bath, and hot soup all combined to make her feel much more like herself, and restless. She was used to being alone, more or less. Her father had died before she was born, and Beau's father had departed the scene not long after his birth. Elena Barnes Rafferty hadn't been an easy woman to be married to, or to be the offspring of, come to that. Neither Maggie nor Beau bore her any malice. She had loved them both, something they had never doubted. But her artistic gifts had caused her more pain than pleasure, demanding much of her time and energy and leaving little for her children, which was probably why they were so close as adults. Growing up, they had only had each other. Still, with differing careers, she and Beau sometimes went weeks without seeing each other, and since virtually all of Maggie's friends were cops who worked difficult hours, she found herself alone often enough to be accustomed to it. Usually, anyway. But not tonight. She went into her studio, thinking it might help to work for a while, but since she didn't have a commission at the moment and didn't feel particularly inspired, instead found herself staring broodingly at the single canvas propped on her working easel, blank except for the vague outline of long hair and the indistinct shape of a face. Unidentifiable. I'm losing it. That's the problem, she muttered. The image was a virtual duplicate of the one in her sketchpad, a few uncertain lines too tentative to provide any sense at all of an individual. She didn't even know for sure that he had long hair, just guessed that he did, because both Hollis and Ellen Randall had felt something like that brush against their skin. Maggie had felt it too. She shivered and turned on the small stereo system she kept in the studio, filling the silence with quiet, pleasant music. It was dark outside, but the lighting in the studio was excellent, and the music made the room feel warm and safe. At least for now. Frowning, Maggie moved the canvas off the easel and put a clean blank one in its place. She went to her work table and chose brushes and tubes of color, mixing the latter on her palette without really thinking about what she was doing. When her tools were ready, she stood before the easel and gazed at the blank canvas for a moment, then took a deep breath and closed her eyes. Beau said she could do this if she tried, if she could trust in her own abilities enough to let go of her conscious control. It wasn't an easy thing to do, and so far Maggie had resisted every attempt. But as she stood there with her eyes closed, listening to the soft music and keeping her mind as blank as possible, a strange thing began to happen. It was almost as if she drifted away, almost as if she fell asleep and began dreaming. The dream was peaceful, with soft music in the background and the sound of her own steady breathing up close, and all she could see was blue sky stretching forever, the expanse broken only intermittently by fluffy white clouds. She seemed to be far away, and getting farther away moment by moment, and yet she could still hear the music, hear herself breathing, smell the familiar scents of her studio. It was a very peculiar feeling. It seemed to last only a moment or two, yet she had the strong sense of the passage of time, and when she opened her eyes abruptly with an odd, jarring sensation of shock, it was to find herself standing at her work table with her back to the easel. Her palette lay before her, covered with gobs and blobs of paint she didn't remember selecting. When she looked at her hands, it was to see more paint, bright and dark flecks and smears of color on her skin from wrists to fingertips, and even more, heavily spattered on and completely ruining her sweater. As if she'd been working hard, and for a long time. When she touched the paint on her sweater, hesitantly, most of it felt nearly dry to the touch. She was using acrylic paints rather than oil, but still. Her fingers felt stiff, cramped, and there was an ache between her shoulder blades, the sort of ache she got only after hours working at her easel. There was no clock in the studio. Maggie fumbled to push up the paint-crusted sleeve of her sweater to see her watch, and was deeply disturbed to see it was after midnight. Hours. She'd been in here for hours. She gripped the edge of the work table, conscious now that her breathing was no longer steady, that she was acutely aware of the canvas on the easel behind her. She could feel it there. Whatever it was, she had painted in a state of virtual unconsciousness, almost as if it leaned toward her, reached out for her. She was terrified to turn around. "Paint on canvas," she whispered. "That's all it is. Just paint on canvas. Probably not even a recognizable image. How could it be, when my eyes were closed, when I wasn't thinking of anything in particular?" Maggie drew a deep breath. "There won't be anything there except paint on canvas. That's all." But even with those reasonable words said aloud, like a mantra, it took all the self-command Maggie could muster to force herself to turn around and look at what she had done. "Jesus," she whispered, staring in horror at what was unquestionably the best work she'd ever done. The painting, all too hideously complete, was done almost entirely in slashes of black and flesh tones and scarlet, yet for all the limited use of color, the central image looked so lifelike that it might have breathed. If it could have breathed. The woman lay sprawled against a dim, indistinct background, her wispy dark hair fanned out around her head and visible only because of the blood streaking the strands. Her head was slightly tilted and turned so that she seemed to be gazing at the watcher in a mute plea for help that had never come. Between her open, bruised, and puffy eyelids, more darkness peered out because her eyes were gone, the empty sockets seeping blood that trickled down her temples. Her sensitive mouth was slightly open, the delicate lines of her lips misshapen by swelling and bruising, and another thin line of blood trailed down over her chin and jaw. On the other side of her face an ugly bruise marred the high cheekbone. She was naked, her body so petite it almost seemed childlike with its small, high breasts and gently rounded belly. But there was nothing childlike about what had been done to her. The breasts bore more horrible bruising, and one nipple was missing, the ragged wound showing the unmistakable marks of teeth. The rounded belly had also been sickeningly mutilated, laid open from the sternum to the pubic bone in a single deep slash, a gape in wet scarlet. Her legs were splayed wide, knees slightly raised, and more blood streaked her thighs and had pooled between them in a congealing puddle of crimson and maroon. Around one delicate ankle was a thin gold chain, from which dangled a tiny gold heart. It was that final poignant detail that shattered Maggie's frozen horror. She dropped to her knees, fighting to keep from retching, unable to tear her eyes away from the painting, from the dreadful image of a dead woman she had never seen before in her life. Tuesday, November 6th. It was something of a joke around the department that Luke Drummond was proud of the fancy conference room in his station, proud of the wide, polished table that could seat more than 12 in nicely comfortable chairs, and provide them lots of elbow room in which to do whatever it was he pictured them doing in the room. Nobody had ever been quite clear on what that might be. The truth was, the room had never been used for anything more than an occasional hand of poker when the late shift got bored. Until now, anyway. Andy decided it was high time the conference room was actually used for something remotely resembling police work, and since both the usual investigatory methods and Scott and Jennifer's work were beginning to pile up paper they needed to keep handy and in some kind of order, it seemed logical to use that space. So Andy commandeered the room, and within a couple of hours that morning had efficiently shifted the bulk of the files and other paperwork on the investigation from various desks in the bullpen to the conference room. The room had at least been set up to facilitate such a move, so it was a simple task to have the switchboard reroute relevant calls to the multi-line phones in there, and Andy pretty much rerouted himself to the room on a semi-permanent basis. "We also have a bit more privacy in here," he told Scott and Jennifer when they gathered there shortly before lunchtime. "I won't declare this room off-limits to those not actively involved in the investigation, but I will make it known that anything in here is to be considered confidential." Jennifer shifted a cinnamon toothpick to the other side of her mouth and said, "And by doing so we can hope that they won't think we're nuts, or if they do, that they won't talk about how nuts we are." Andy shook his head. "I doubt anybody's going to think we're completely nuts. Not with this." He nodded toward the bulletin board they had just finished setting up. "We have sketches, photos, or descriptions of 4 victims in 1934, closely matching 4 of our victims. That has to be more than coincidence, and it has to mean something." "Yeah, but what?" Scott wondered. "That's what we have to determine. Which means we'll use every source we can until we figure it out." "Does that mean you're telling Garrett about this?" Jennifer asked. "Yeah. Drummond insisted we keep some of the crime scene and victim details confidential, but he didn't say a damn thing about our speculation and lines of research. Garrett's smart, and he has sources we can use, so I'm telling him. Maggie, too. I'll try to get them both in here this afternoon." Jennifer tapped the folded newspaper lying on the table before her. "Well, since Garrett got his picture in the paper today and the reporters are hotly speculating that he's assisting the police because of his sister being a victim, I imagine you'll be hearing from an unhappy Luke any time now." Andy sighed. "Yeah, I know. What the hell was I doing letting a civilian into the Mitchell house when our forensics team was still working there, for Christ's sake? I know what he'll say. And if he doesn't like the way I'm running this investigation, he can run it himself." Jennifer grinned. "Aw, he won't want to do that. Might ruin his nice manicure or get blood on his shoes. If you lean on your acting talents and make like you want to dump it all in his lap, he'll probably make himself scarce for at least the rest of the week." "It's a thought," Andy said, brightening. Scott laughed, but said, "Well, we should have plenty to keep us busy. Even running into dead ends takes time." "No sign of the rest of the files from 1934? Andy asked. "Nope, but I haven't stopped looking. If the damn things exist, I'll find them." "In the meantime," Jennifer said, looking at Andy, "anything new in the search for Samantha Mitchell? Since we've been in here trying to get organized this morning, I haven't heard." "No, nothing new. I've got teams out canvassing the neighborhood and every patrol in the city keeping their eyes peeled for that lady. It's like she dropped off the face of the earth." "What about Maggie's hunch? Did forensics get anything from the Mitchells' game room?" "A couple of things, yeah. They picked up chemical traces of chloroform on one spot in the carpet not too far from the door, as well as a few strands of Mrs. Mitchell's hair. And there are some very faint signs that he got into that room through a window. There was a short in the security net that the system didn't pick up for some reason." "A short he caused?" Scott wondered. "Could be. The really interesting thing is that Mitchell insists his wife never, but never, stayed alone in the house without having the system on. So if the attacker knocked her out with chloroform, then who deactivated the system at the front door?" Jennifer finished. Andy nodded. "Exactly. It was deactivated at the control panel by the front door, so he either knew or was somehow able to obtain the security code. And it wasn't one even a hacker could figure out just by using the predictable numbers, phone numbers, anniversaries, or birthdays, and so on. Our resident electronics wizard says our guy is either very, very good or very, very lucky." Jennifer said, "And since we already know he beat a top-notch system in order to snatch Laura Hughes, we can assume he's very, very good." "That would probably be a safe assumption." Scott said, "How come Maggie tumbled to it being the game room Samantha Mitchell was abducted from? I mean, how come our guys missed it the first time through?" "I asked them that," Andy said. "They had lots of reasons. But what it all boiled down to is that they concentrated on the expected points of entry, like the front and back doors. Needless to say, they won't make that mistake again." Jennifer smiled slightly. "I'll bet. You can tear the bark off a tree with that temper of yours when you're really pissed, Andy." "I was really pissed." "I'm not surprised." Scott said plaintively, "But how did Maggie know?" "Instinct," Andy answered promptly, "and she's got enough sense to check the unexpected as well as the expected. Just like you two. Keep it up, will you?" Scott nodded, faint puzzlement still lingering on his face. Andy decided he'd make a lousy poker player. Jennifer said, "The other victims were found within 48 hours of being abducted, so if it is our guy, we should know something by tomorrow." "Yeah," Andy said. "Question is, will Samantha Mitchell be a living victim or a dead one?" To say Maggie hadn't slept well was an understatement, and she was feeling unusually raw and edgy when she went to Beau's house on Tuesday morning. She let herself in and made her way to the studio, calling out hello as she went. Beau glanced up from the portrait he was working on and said immediately, "Have some coffee." The pot was already on the work table, along with 2 cups and the milk Maggie preferred. "So you knew I was coming," she muttered, pouring herself a cup and sitting down. "I thought you might be, yeah." "Yeah?" "Yeah. Call it a hunch." "God damn it, Beau." He smiled slightly. "Okay, it was more than a hunch." "I could really dislike you sometimes, you know that?" "I know. I'm sorry, Maggie." She sat in silence for some minutes, drinking her coffee and watching him paint. Then she sighed a bit raggedly. "She's dead, Bo. Samantha Mitchell is dead, and her baby with her." He paused to wipe off one of his brushes, gazing at her soberly. "I'm sorry about that, too. Have they found her body yet?" "No, but they will." "When?" "You tell me." She stared at him challengingly. He returned to his painting, but after a moment said, "Tomorrow, I think. Early tomorrow, or maybe late tonight. Hard to tell." "Do you know where?" Bo was silent. "Maybe I was wrong. Maybe she's not dead yet. If we could find her as soon as possible—" "It wouldn't make any difference," he said softly. "She's dead already, Maggie. You know she's dead already." Maggie knew, but she'd been hoping. After a long moment she said, "Yesterday at her house, while I was walking through, I felt her. And when he grabbed her, she was so scared. So scared. For herself, for her baby. She knew neither one of them would survive. From the instant he grabbed her, she knew." Bo painted for a moment, then asked, "Did she know who he was?" "The same way I know who he is. Not a face, not a name, just evil. Just evil alive and walking around pretending to be human. I have to stop him. I have to." "Yes. And there isn't much time left. I feel that, too. More and more with every day that passes. If I don't stop him soon, it'll be too late. It's my last chance, Bo." "You don't know that." "Do you?" "No." She laughed without humor. "If you did know, would you tell me?" "Probably not." "Free will again?" "Yes, free will." Leaving his painting finally, Bo cleaned his brushes and palette, then fixed himself a cup of coffee and joined her. "You're doing the best you can, Maggie. It's all you can ask of yourself." "It isn't enough." "It will be. Trust yourself. Trust your abilities and your instincts." She looked at him steadily. "Yesterday was a real bitch of a day. First interviewing Hollis and then walking through the Mitchell house. And it got worse. It actually got worse. I painted something last night. I closed my eyes and cleared my mind the way you told me to. And I painted something horrible. It was inside me, Bo. That image, dark and bloody, was in my head, a part of my soul. I could almost feel her die." He didn't look surprised, and merely nodded. "I told you it would probably happen." "Not like that. You didn't tell me it would be like that." "You're an artist. You think and feel in images. It's natural." "Natural? What's natural about painting the corpse of a tortured, mutilated woman? A woman I've never met, never even seen?" His voice remained calm. "You have to try to distance yourself, Maggie, or this is going to destroy you." She drew a breath and struggled to keep her voice level. "I told you once before that I was afraid. It's blinding me, I think. I don't know what to do next." Bo hesitated, then said, "It isn't your fight alone. You have to remember that. Stop trying to do it all yourself, Maggie. Let them help you. Let him help you." After a moment, Maggie nodded. "I'll try." She pushed her cup away and got to her feet. Gazing into his coffee cup, Bo said, almost absently, "You might want to show Garrett the painting." Just the idea made Maggie feel even more raw. Why? Why should I show him that? In me? Call it a hunch, Bo said.
So that's what we have so far.
Quentin frowned at the stacks of paper and files spread out on the conference table in the parlor, then looked at Maggie again. Not a whole hell of a lot, but probably as much as the investigating officers.
Kendra said, "He didn't mean that the way it sounded."
Quentin lifted his brows. How did it sound?
"Arrogant," she explained. "We've only been here a few days, and we're claiming to have as much info as the cops who've been on the case for months. Use your head, Quentin."
"You're a lot more fun when you're typing something," he told her.
"And you wouldn't rattle on like this if you didn't have a dozen cups of coffee in your system. I keep telling you, caffeine is not your friend."
"I'm not wired."
"Want me to point out how many times you paced the length of the table while you talked?"
John said,
"Ignore the byplay. Apparently it's their way of working together." "Yeah, I got that," Maggie said. She was sitting at the far end of the conference table near the windows, chin in hand. "But could we call a truce, guys? Andy wants John and me back at the station this afternoon, and it'd be nice if I got all this clear in my mind so I'll have my story straight, just in case any awkward little questions come up."
Quentin grinned at her. "Walking both sides of the street beginning to bug you?"
"Let's just say I'd feel a lot happier if Andy, at least, was in on this parallel investigation of ours. For one thing—" She broke off, wondering irritably if she had any hope at all of keeping things straight. "For one thing," John finished calmly, "he and his detectives do have, or think they have, something new. Something he's told neither you nor I." Maggie looked at him. "So you caught that?" "For a cop, Andy has a very readable face. Either that or he wanted both of us to guess there was something and press him to find out what it was." She thought about it, then nodded slowly. "Maybe. Without Luke Drummond holding him on a leash, I think Andy would use just about any resource he could get his hands on to cage this animal."
Quentin said, "So given his druthers, he'd grant you two complete access?"
"I think so, yeah. As a matter of fact, I don't think he'd have too much of a problem with a couple of FBI agents working quietly behind the scenes to help."
"He wouldn't think we were stepping on his toes?"
Maggie shook her head immediately. "Not Andy. Unlike Drummond, Andy's not the least bit political, and he doesn't give a damn who breaks a case or gets the credit for it, just as long as the bad guys get put away. He's a cop to his bones."
"The best kind," Quentin said.
"Yeah, which is why I don't think he'd protest too much if he found out about you two. With Drummond breathing down his neck and hell-bent not to call in outside help, the fact that you guys are here unofficially is all to the good, as far as Andy's concerned."
John said, "And if Drummond does somehow find out, I'll take the flak. He's already pissed at my interference, and today's newspapers won't make him any happier. I might as well make him good and mad while I'm at it. He can get royally pissed at me for acting without authority, and he won't have to blame any of his people for going behind his back."
Quentin glanced at his partner, then said to John,
"It's up to you two, of course, but if this detective is likely to be open to our involvement, we say let's tell him. In all honesty, we'd prefer at least one cop on the inside and in a position of authority to know we're involved. It would certainly make sharing information easier and more profitable, and it'll undoubtedly make our little jaunt out here more palatable to Bishop."
Maggie frowned slightly. "Bishop?"
"Our boss,"
Quentin explained.
"Bishop leads our unit at Quantico."
If anything, Maggie's frown deepened. She studied Quentin for a moment, then turned her gaze to Kendra. Abruptly, she asked, "You wouldn't happen to be psychic too, would you?" Without a blink or a hesitation, Kendra said, "What I am we usually term adept, used more to mean skilled than expert. I'm very mildly telepathic,
but I tend to be able to pick up more from objects than people. And this unit of yours is entirely made up of adepts? Quentin also didn't hesitate. More or less. We have some support people who barely qualify as adepts, but most of the field agents are. Varying abilities and strengths. We use our abilities as just another tool to investigate crimes. Needless to say, it's something we generally keep quiet about, at least publicly. Kendra murmured. You understand why, of course. Maggie smiled. Of course. It's not exactly something the Bureau would want to advertise, especially with its other public relations nightmares of recent years. Exactly. And then there's the whole believability factor. Telepathy, precognition, not what they usually teach in Criminal Investigation Techniques 101. You're not just using unscientific methods, you're practically out in the ether. Quentin grinned. Sometimes even further out. One day I'll have to introduce you to a young medium we know, who talks to the dead. I can hardly wait. She's convincing, believe me. But for now, yes, traditional cops tend to frown on what they don't understand, even with a solid success record like ours. So even though we're billed as using unconventional investigative methods, we tend to stick to traditional police work as much as possible. So you generally pretend to be conventional agents with a few lucky breaks and a little intuition? I'll bet you guys have a hell of a time coming up with reasonable explanations for how you know the things you know. It can be challenging, Quentin admitted. Yes, I imagine it can. And you're letting me in on it because I am, presumably, psychic as well? We wanted all our cards on the table, Kendra said. In our experience, psychics outside our unit become much more comfortable working with us once they understand that we understand what they've been going through. Maggie glanced at John, who was expressionless, then lifted a brow at Kendra. And do you understand? Frankly, you're a bit outside even our experience, Maggie. We have an empath in the unit, but he's nothing like as strong as you seem to be. Or as uniquely focused, Quentin added. Is it only violent experiences you pick up on? Unlike the two of them, Maggie did hesitate before replying, but finally shrugged and said, That's strongest. Maybe because that's where I've had to concentrate all these years. Places where violent events have happened. People who've experienced trauma and violence. I can usually sense other emotions when I try, but more dimly, and they don't affect me the way violence and pain do. Matter of fact, but not without sympathy, Quentin said, Not only is there actual pain and all the traumatic emotions, but it drains you just the way it would if the event had actually happened to you. She nodded. Sometimes I just get a little tired, but other times I seem to need to sleep 10 or 12 hours before I feel normal again. And it's all the senses, isn't it? You feel what they did, see what they did, smell what they did, everything. Again, Maggie nodded, very conscious now of John's silent attention. He'd told her that Andy had confirmed what she had picked up at the Mitchell house the previous day, but he hadn't said whether the confirmation made any difference to him. And in the presence of the two agents, she was guarding herself, so she had no idea what he was feeling. Kendra said, It's the same when you bond with victims, when they relive what happened to them? More or less. Sometimes their own minds have dulled the sharp edges of the pain, and it isn't so intense. Other times their emotions nearly overwhelm me, and I can barely concentrate to ask them questions or listen to their answers. She drew a breath. Not a lot of fun. Deliberately, Quentin said, So why do you do it? Why do you put yourself through that kind of ordeal, Maggie? Why do you? She challenged. He smiled faintly. My abilities don't hurt me. Generally speaking, I don't suffer. But you do. So why do you keep opening yourself up to that kind of suffering? Before Maggie could even begin to answer, John's cell phone rang, and she felt his gaze on her as she muttered, not quite under her breath, "Saved by the bell." John said hello, then listened for a moment. His face hardly changed expression, but something in his voice warned them when he said, "All right, we're on our way." It was Quentin who asked, "What happened?" "Andy wants us at the station now." John kept his gaze on Maggie. "Thomas Mitchell just received what appears to be a ransom note from the man who kidnapped his wife." Chapter 10. Andy greeted them at his desk, but led the way immediately to the conference room, where 2 more detectives rose to meet them, or rather, to meet John. Maggie obviously knew both and murmured hello to Jennifer Seaton and Scott Cowan, and then took a seat at the long table while they were being introduced to John. He wasn't so preoccupied by meeting new people that he didn't notice Maggie had isolated herself, choosing a chair between 2 others that each held large file boxes. When the introductions were over and everybody sat down, he deliberately moved one of the file boxes and sat beside Maggie. She sent him a quick glance, but otherwise kept her gaze fixed on the blank bulletin board placed several feet away from the other side of the table. He didn't have a clue what she was thinking, but he knew stress when he saw it, and he saw it in Maggie. From the moment she'd shown up at the hotel this morning, he'd been absolutely certain that something else had happened, something that had shaken her badly. Was this it? Had Maggie realized somehow that she'd been wrong in saying Samantha Mitchell was in the hands of the blindfold rapist? Or was it something else? "I have 3 more detectives on the case full-time," Andy told them, "but right now they're out trying to find out if this note is legit. Since the rest of us are here, I thought now would be the time to go over a few things." He pushed the plastic-bagged piece of paper toward John. "I want to know what you think about this." The note was block-printed on what looked like an ordinary sheet of notepaper torn from a pad, and the message was chillingly simple. "If you ever want to see your wife again, it'll cost you $100K. There were 3 smears on the paper, 2 that looked like black fingerprint powder, and 1 that looked like blood. "Prints?" John asked. "Yeah. Couple of real clear ones. One of my guys was with Mitchell when he got the note, so it was handled properly. The prints likely belonged to whoever sent it. We're checking the state and federal fingerprint databases. So far no matches, but we just got started looking." John slid the note over to Maggie. "Is he stupid, or just an amateur?" "Well, that's part of the problem we're having with this whole kidnap thing. Mitchell, he's all ready to pay the so-called ransom, but we've got quite a few questions. I'm sure you can guess what they are. Why a kidnapper would have asked for such a ridiculously small sum from somebody like Mitchell," John said. "Why he would carelessly put his own fingerprints on the note. How somebody that seemingly incompetent could have beaten a first-class security system in order to snatch Samantha Mitchell out of her own house, leaving virtually no evidence behind. How am I doing?" "Full marks," Andy said. "That's pretty much what we thought." Maggie pushed the bag away from her and murmured, "But?" Andy nodded. "But. That is blood on the note, and the type matches Samantha Mitchell's. We can try for a DNA match, but that'll take weeks. My hunch is the situation's going to get resolved long before we'd get the results." "How was the note delivered?" John asked. "Just stuck in his mailbox on top of the regular mail. Nobody saw anyone near the box except for the usual mail carrier, and she swears she didn't put it there. I'm inclined to believe her, especially since she's been at her job for 15 years without so much as an unauthorized sick day." John thought about that. "Nobody saw anyone? I assume we're talking about the press. Don't they still have the house staked out?" "Yeah. and tried to interview my guys instead of answering the questions, damn them. But the bottom line is, they didn't see anything unusual. Not especially surprising. With a bunch of them milling around near the end of the driveway and the mailbox, it wouldn't have been too hard for somebody with a camera around his neck to wander past the box and pause for half a minute without being noticed. Maggie stirred slightly. "Andy, do you believe Samantha Mitchell was kidnapped and is being held for ransom?" "Can't say that I do. Everything we know about her disappearance matches the M.O. of our guy, and if I'm certain of anything, it's that he doesn't give a flying fuck about money." Jennifer said, "Scott and I agree with Andy. We think the rapist snatched her, and he's not going to get all helpful and leave us his fingerprints at this late date. So the question is, who sent the note?" "Somebody who knows the rapist?" John suggested. "Or, hard as it is to believe, somebody who read all the news reports and decided to try to cash in on a disappearance." Andy grimaced. "That last is the most likely, we think. Hell of a world we live in." "What about the blood?" John asked. Scott shrugged. "The guy could have picked his own finger and just got lucky with the blood type. I mean, except for the way he left the note without being seen, he isn't coming across as too bright, is he?" "There's another possibility," Maggie said. She wasn't looking at any of them, but gazing at the bagged note. "The blood could be hers. Whoever sent the note could have found her body." Andy looked at her steadily. "You think she's dead?" "Yes, I think she's dead." John was also watching her face, and as she spoke, he felt a little chill of certainty. Maggie didn't just think Samantha Mitchell was dead. She knew it. Kendra slipped back into the passenger side of the car and said, "Let's go, before one of those guys back there decides to ask us for a closer look at my ID." She removed the camera strap from around her neck and returned the camera to its case. Quentin pulled the car smoothly away from the curb half a block up from the Mitchell house. "That ID is designed to stand up to scrutiny, you know." "Even so, no reason to push it." "Okay. So did you get anything useful?" "The reporters all bought the kidnapping story, at first, but whether because the blindfold rapist is better copy, or somebody just reasoned it out, now they're pretty much agreed that it's probably just an attempt to cash in on the disappearance." Any ideas on who might be making that attempt?" "None they were willing to share with me." "You mean your charm had no effect on them?" "Not so you'd notice." "Or your big brown eyes? I suppose they all prefer blue." "Or your uniquely flexible mind?" "That barely impresses you." Kendra pulled a small black address book from her shoulder bag and began turning the pages. "What we need is someone who knows the disreputable side of Seattle a lot better than we do." "You forget. Seattle was my childhood home." "I didn't forget. But you've been away from here, 20 years? "About that, but I come back for regular visits." "Still, I imagine things might have changed around here since your childhood." "Sure, which is why I keep in touch with people who have a very firm finger on the pulse of this place. Joey, for instance. Joey is a living testament to the adage that only the good die young, because if the bad died young, Joey would have dropped in his crib." "You think he might have sent that note?" "No. Figuring out and executing a plan of any kind would take Joey longer than a few hours. Give him a few weeks, and he might come up with something, but not a few hours. I think he might know who did come up with the kidnapping idea, though. If anybody would know, it would be Joey." "And do you know where we can find him?" "Give me 10 minutes, Quentin said. It turned out to be an optimistic estimate, but knowing her partner, Kendra was ready for that. In a distinctly seedy neighborhood, she waited patiently at the end of a long alley Quentin had disappeared into. keeping one eye on their car while standing ready to back him up if need be. For the half hour or so he was gone, she politely refused 3 invitations for a date, and not so politely warned off an interested pimp. When Quentin reappeared abruptly, she said, "You picked this corner deliberately, didn't you?" He grinned. "Still a busy place for the trade, huh?" "Bastard," she said without heat. "Well, I knew you could take care of yourself. Think of it as a compliment." "Yeah, right." She eyed him and waited. "Okay, I've got to know," he said. "What was the top offer?" "You seriously expect me to tell you what several lonely men offered for my body?" "Several?" "Don't push it, Quentin." He grinned again. "Who knows when we might have to go undercover in the trade, and I'd need to know your street worth. That's all." "Go to hell," she said politely. "Did you or did you not find out where Joey is?" "I did." "Then let's go." 5 minutes later, sitting beside him in their car, Kendra said, "500. Astonished, Quentin said, "As much as that? Geez, either the streets around here have changed since my day, or inflation must be a real factor." "Bastard!" she said, this time with considerable heat. John closed the folder containing the forensics report on the Mitchell house, as well as case notes and a photograph of the missing woman, lifted a questioning brow at Maggie, and when she shook her head, pushed the file back across the table to Andy. "Thanks for letting me take a look," he said. "Not that I see anything helpful." "That's the way it always is with the disappearances. Not a damned thing to go on, and not much more when the women are found." She knew it wasn't a pointed reference, but Maggie nevertheless said, "I wish I could give you a sketch of this animal, Andy, but he's been so careful. None of the victims have been able to remember any helpful details." "I know that, Maggie." "I should try talking to Ellen Randall again. I wanted to give her a few days to calm down after I intruded and messed things up," John finished. "I really am sorry about that." Maggie nodded. "I know. She probably wasn't ready to talk to me anyway, and I doubt she'll be able to give me anything useful, but I have to try. I'll call her this afternoon and find out if she'll meet with me, maybe tomorrow." "Here?" Andy asked. "I think I'll leave it up to her. She might be far more comfortable at home." "Well, let me know if you'll need an interview room." "Okay." Andy tapped the Mitchell file with one finger. "So that's where we stand," he said. "On the Mitchell investigation, at any rate. I've got people out trying to find out what they can about this damn note, and I've got people looking for Samantha Mitchell, dead or alive. Since there's not much more we can do in either case, at least for the time being, there's something else we wanted to discuss with you two." John glanced at the 2 younger detectives, then looked steadily at Andy. "I had a feeling there was. I wasn't keeping anything back because of orders, but because this is pretty far-fetched, John." "In what way?" Andy leaned back and gestured slightly toward the other cops, clearly inviting them to explain. Jennifer said, "We were sure this guy was picking particular women, but with all the varied descriptions of them and where he grabbed them, nothing pointed to any sort of common denominator. And even though we're pretty sure he's been active only for 6 months or so, we kept hearing from the shrink that his ritual was too well established to be so recent. So Scott and I started wondering if maybe he was getting his ideas from somewhere specific, like maybe accounts of old, unsolved crimes." "I wouldn't call that far-fetched," John commented. "In fact, it sounds pretty reasonable." "It is reasonable, except for what we found when we started digging through files." "Which was?" Maggie asked. John glanced at her quickly, suddenly aware of another of those odd little certainties. This was something else she knew. "Which was a little creepy," Jennifer said. What we found was a very similar string of rape murders that took place here in Seattle in 1934. 6 women, for certain, though possibly 8 in all, killed within an 18-month period. So he is copying earlier crimes, John said. Here's the creepier part. Jennifer rose from the table and went to flip one of the bulletin boards so that they could all see the other side. Under the heading 2001, 4 photographs were pinned in a vertical row. Pictures of Laura Hughes, Christina Walsh, Ellen Randall, and Hollis Templeton. Beside that row, and under the heading 1934, was another row, this one containing 3 sketches and 2 photos. You'll notice, Jennifer said, that the first sketch, done in 1934, shows a woman virtually identical to Laura Hughes. The second sketch is pretty amateur and didn't help them ID the victim, but it and the description of her taken together closely match Ellen Randall. The third sketch is backed up by a photograph, and as you can see, this victim resembled Hollis Templeton. We only have a crime scene photo of the 4th victim, but the description matches Christina Walsh. Maggie said, "He's picking lookalikes." Andy said, "I doubt it's coincidence that these women just happened to be attacked in much the same way as their virtual doubles were almost 70 years ago. John said, "So he has access to police files?" "Maybe, but there have been books written about unsolved crimes here in the city, so we can't be sure he would have had to use police files." Jennifer said, "And there's something else." She told them about the note found in her car, finishing, "Needless to say, we don't know who wrote the note, how they got into my locked car, or why they picked me. We also don't know if he, she, or it was trying to be helpful or is bent on leading us on a really big wild goose chase." "But," Andy said, "we have to assume the 1894 date could be important, at least until we prove otherwise. Problem is, we've had no luck running down any files at all from that year. Not really surprising, since Seattle was only founded a few decades earlier." Maggie said, "Maybe it's some other place, some other city." "Maybe," Andy said, "but if it is, I don't see how we have a hope in hell of figuring out where." Kendra hadn't really pictured Joey in her mind, but she was definitely surprised when they ran him to ground in a crowded backstreet pool room. It was a disreputable place, by and large, where the other patrons scrupulously minded their own business when Quentin strolled up behind a hulking redhead who was pocketing his winnings from a game and tapped him on one meaty shoulder. "Hey, Joey." Joey swung around, his fierce expression a neon warning to any sane person. Quentin, of course, didn't so much as step back. He just smiled, that curiously sweet and wholly deceptive smile of his, and added, "How've you been?" Kendra didn't draw her gun, but she kept a hand near it. She had a lot of faith in her partner's abilities, but despite Quentin's height and undoubted strength, Joey was taller and looked as though he could have lifted an all-pro tackle over his head and heaved him across the room. But it was Joey who backed up a step, a funny little grin twisting his lips. "Oh, hey, Quentin. Long time no see." "Oh, it's just been a few months," Quentin said cheerfully. "Still, we have so much to catch up on. Let's say we step into your office and talk about old times. Okay, Joey?" Without protest and with rather astonishing meekness, Joey turned and led the way to a back hall and an incredibly filthy men's room. Kendra did her best not to touch anything, and wondered vaguely if she could throw her shoes away the moment they got out of here. There was something crunching underfoot, and she really didn't want to look down and see what it was. Joey didn't object to her presence, which was hardly surprising since he didn't take his eyes off Quentin. "You back for good?" he asked, hoping transparently for a negative response. "Nah, just visiting, as usual. You keeping your nose clean, Joey?" "Sure I am, Quentin." Quentin lifted a disbelieving brow. Okay. I might have been in a little trouble here and there. Nothing major. You haven't killed anybody else, have you, Joey? No, I swear. I can find out if you're lying to me. You know I can. Joey's lips twisted again in that sick little grin. Yeah, I know. Honest, Quentin, I've been good. Ask anybody. I'll do that, Joey. In the meantime, I'm looking for a little information. Okay, sure. Shoot. You know about the disappearance of Samantha Mitchell? Joey frowned for a moment, gears almost visibly turning, then nodded. Oh, yeah. Supposed to be another one grabbed by that rapist. That's right. But now somebody's claiming to have kidnapped her, and that somebody wants her husband to cough up a ransom. Joey shifted uneasily. It ain't me, Quentin. Then who is it, Joey? What sort of son of a bitch decided to take advantage of that poor lady's misfortune? I don't know, Quentin. Honest. Gently, Quentin said, I want you to find out for me, Joey, and I want you to find out fast. Understand? Joey nodded. Okay. Okay, Quentin. I can ask around, sure. Guys owe me favors. Somebody's bound to know what's going on. Quentin produced a card and handed it to Joey. The underlined number is my cell phone. Use that to call me as soon as you find out what I want to know. Joey accepted the card gingerly. Right. Give me a couple of hours, and I'll see what I can dig up. Don't make me wait any longer than that, okay? Sure. Call me quick enough, and I might not have time to ask around and find out what you've been up to, Joey. Once again, the gears turning behind Joey's round blue eyes were almost visible, and his hopeful understanding definitely was. Yeah. Okay, yeah, I get it. I'll call, Quentin. Count on it. They left him there, his back literally pressed up against the grimy wall between two disgusting sinks. He showed no inclination to follow them out, and in fact, when Kendra glanced back as they were leaving the pool room, he still hadn't come out of the bathroom. That was one very nervous, Incredible Hulk, she commented as they got into the car. I'd swear he was terrified of you. Quentin smiled as he started the car, but didn't respond to the comment. Kendra eyed him, then said, So Joey's an old childhood pal, huh? More of a childhood acquaintance, you could say. Uh-huh. I don't suppose you'd want to tell me about this interesting childhood of yours. Oh, it's not interesting. Boring, really. Really? Sure. Somehow I doubt that. But never mind. For now. Who did Joey kill? I think that's whom, he said thoughtfully. Stop correcting my grammar and answer the question. Yes, ma'am. Joey killed his father. Shotgun blast full in the face. Jesus. And he's running around loose? Our judicial system sucks. Not so much in this case. Joey was 11 when it happened, and his old man had just beaten his mother into unconsciousness for about the 100th time. Joey walked in on it, took one look, and something snapped. He very coolly went into the bedroom, found and loaded the old man's gun, then came back and blew him away. Kendra turned slightly in her seat to study her partner. That was his story? Well, his story for the record was that he got the gun only to defend his mother, and that when his father charged toward him with murderous rage in his evil face, Joey acted purely in self-defense. The evidence backed him up. It didn't contradict his version of events, especially with a witness testifying on his behalf. A witness? Yeah. A classmate had come home with him to borrow a school book. That was back when Joey actually showed a glimmer of turning into something better than his old man. Anyway, the witness backed him up, and Joey got probation and therapy. The therapy doesn't seem to have done him much good, if he's been in trouble since. No, and he dropped out of school as soon as he could outrun the truant officer. Given his genetic heritage and environment, not so surprising. His father really was one of those pure evil bastards life sometimes produces, and I hear his grandfather was worse. But Joey got enough of his mother's blood, and her influence, to make him a lot more manageable. He'd con you 6 ways from Sunday and pick your pockets if he found you unconscious or dead, but he's terrified of his own strength and temper. He doesn't want to turn out like his old man. To his credit, he usually manages not to turn violent. Kendra nodded. So why is he wary of you? Afraid you'll tell the truth after all these years? Quentin smiled faintly. I wouldn't. But the possibility does help me keep Joey in line. Even from the other side of the country? Well, I try to come back here at least once a year or so, and I always look him up, find out what he's been into. He chuckled. Ever since I joined the Bureau, Joey's kept his nose pretty clean. I think he's seen one too many Hollywood distortions of the power of the FBI. So your badge helps keep him in line as well. So far, Joey's down as a one-time impulse killer, and I'd like to keep it that way. It's the difference between being bad and crossing over into being evil. Kendra studied him a moment longer, then said, Why do I get the feeling your enigmatic past contains a number of stories like Joey's? Probably your vivid imagination. She sighed, unsurprised. That was a filthy place you dragged me into. Sorry about that. Kendra turned her gaze to the windshield. You owe me a new pair of shoes. With their questions left hanging unanswered in the air, but providing a definite spur, both John and Maggie volunteered to stick around for a few hours and help go through the file boxes in search of more information about the earlier crimes. Within an hour, they had files stacked on every available chair, but nothing else to show for their efforts. It was nearly 1 when Scott and Jennifer left to bring back a late lunch for them, and John took the opportunity to tell Andy about Quentin and Kendra. Shit, Andy said, though clearly more startled than angry. FBI agents, and unofficial? I didn't know the Bureau did anything unofficially. They belong to a fairly new unit of investigators and have a bit more autonomy than most. They're very good, Andy, and completely trustworthy, and they aren't interested in taking any credit no matter who breaks the case. It was damned officious of you, John. I know, and I'll apologize if you want me to, not for calling them in, but for not telling you I was going to. Gee, that's big of you. John chuckled. Unwilling to relent just yet, Andy gave Maggie a hard stare. You knew about this too? She met his gaze squarely. I don't much care who gets the credit either, Andy, or who helps, just as long as we get this animal in a cage where he belongs. Drummond's going to shit a brick, Andy sighed. He's already blasted me once today, John, thanks to you. Do me a favor and keep that famous profile of yours off the front page from now on, will you? I'll do my best. And none of us wants Drummond to find out too soon, believe me. If and when he does find out, it'll be me who called them in, not you or anyone under Drummond. Andy eyed him wryly. You got a death wish? I can handle Drummond. John smiled. I've been handling men like him for 15 years. He's got a lot of juice in this town, John. So have I. I just haven't used much of it yet. Okay. As long as you understand he will not be happy, and as long as none of my people gets the blame. They won't. In that case, when do I get to meet these agents of yours? I'd like to know who I'm working with. We can meet up at the hotel whenever you like, but Quentin and Kendra are out now trying to find out all they can about this supposed kidnapping. They didn't think it was any more likely than your people did. But like Maggie said, whoever sent that note might know something about Samantha Mitchell, and we need to find out what that might be. Think they can find out something before my people can? It wasn't quite a challenge. John smiled. Well, let's just say I've learned never to bet against Quentin. One way or another, he usually finds what he goes looking for.
Chapter 11. Andy decided to strictly limit who in his department would know of the FBI agent's involvement, choosing to tell Scott and Jennifer, but not the other detectives. "All my people have busted their asses on this case," he told Maggie and John, "but these two kids took some initiative and thought outside the box. Besides, I know for a fact they'll be happy about it, and not everybody would." Scott and Jennifer were definitely pleased, especially when John told them of both the agent's profiling expertise, Kendra's computer skills, and the full range of databases available to them with federal authority. "Maybe they'll be able to track down why the 1894 date is important. If it is," Jennifer said. "In the meantime, Andy, if it's okay with you, I'm heading over to the Central Precinct. Their file clerk isn't absolutely sure, but there might be some really old file boxes in their storage room. I want to check them out, see if I can find those missing 1934 files, or possibly some from 1894. Andy looked at the stacks of files on the conference table and sighed. "Yeah, go ahead. Nothing in this mess is helping us." Scott asked, "Jen, want me to come along?" She grinned at him. "Oh, no, pal. You get to put all these useless files back where they belong, and then try to find out what happened to the ones the North Precinct clerk swears were lost in the move to their new building." With a grimace, Scott said, "It is not fun being the low man on the totem pole." But he seemed cheerful enough as he picked up a file box and followed Jennifer from the room. "They need to be busy," Andy told Maggie and John with a sigh. "Neither one of them has been a detective long enough to be comfortable with the realization that 75% of police work is sitting around, either going through papers, trying to piece together a jigsaw puzzle of facts, or just trying to talk through the problem until it starts to make sense." "Sometimes I think most of life is like that," John offered wryly. "I don't blame them for being restless," Maggie said, her brooding gaze fixed on the bulletin board. "It's hell just sitting here waiting, wondering when the phone is going to ring." When it did at that moment, Andy lifted a brow at her and scooped it up. He said, "Brenner," and listened for several minutes, and didn't have to mutter, "Oh, Christ," for everyone in the room to know the news was bad. As soon as he hung up, John guessed. "Samantha Mitchell?" "No," Andy said heavily. "The bastard's having a busy week. We've got another missing woman." In the storage room of the Central Precinct station, Jennifer found a lot of files. A lot of old files, some going all the way back to the 1890s. But she didn't find anything of interest for 1894. There had been relatively few murders reported in Seattle around then, and none that even came close to fitting their criteria. Worse, there was absolutely no sign of any more files for 1934, for that entire decade, as a matter of fact. After more than an hour of fruitless search, she was dusty, irritable, and had 3 paper cuts and a headache. She was also inclined to appreciate computers a lot more than she had before all this had started. Those machines had their bad points, but at least they didn't get dust up her nose and slice up her fingers. She made her way to the station's lounge and sat down with a soft drink, glumly considering her options. They weren't promising. Maybe Scott could track down those files lost in a move to a new building, but it didn't seem likely. Unless she wanted to physically visit every storage room and basement of every station in the city, and she didn't, then she had to accept that this particular trail might well have dead-ended. Jennifer hated dead ends. She had been so sure that something useful would be found in the old files. Oh, she'd been offhand about it with Scott, but from the moment she had seen that first sketch from 1934, the adrenaline rush had been intense. All her instincts had been screaming at her. Finally, after all these months, a break in the investigation. Except that it wasn't, of course. Damn it. "Hey, Seaton, what are you doing in our neck of the woods?" She looked up and managed a faint smile for Terry Lynch as he joined her at the table. "Slumming, of course." He eyed her consideringly. Deceptively open face, as friendly and guileless as always, but his gaze sharp. "There's a smear of gray dust on your nose." "Because you have a filthy storage room," she told him, using a paper napkin to dab at her face. "I wouldn't be at all surprised. Looking for anything interesting?" Jennifer gave him an abbreviated version of the Drummond's got us digging through old files speech, perfectly aware that Terry wasn't buying it. Not easy, she reflected silently, to lie to an old partner, or an old lover. But he nodded gravely, only his wry blue eyes telling her he knew she was bullshitting him. In a chatty tone he said, "You guys any closer to getting that rapist?" "Not so you'd notice." "Just heard there's another woman missing." "Oh, shit. Do we know it's him?" Terry shrugged. "I think your boss is checking it out. Any woman goes missing in the city, you guys get the call. You know that." Jennifer frowned. "If it is him, he's moving a hell of a lot faster." "Looks like." She barely hesitated. "Are you hearing anything on the streets, Terry?" He was a patrolman. Having failed the detective exam Jennifer had passed with flying colors. The blow to his ego hadn't ended their relationship, but her transfer to another precinct, nearly a year ago, had. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup and hunched his shoulders in the thinking posture she recognized with a pang. "Not really." "Not really? So you did hear something, but aren't sure it means anything?" His smile twisted. "Still reading me like a book?" "Yeah, there was one thing. I was going to call you, but... Hell, Jen, it sounds so screwy." "In this case," she told him dryly, "screwy is beginning to be the order of the day, Terry." "What is it?" "Well, we picked up a transient day before yesterday. Got him for creating a disturbance outside a store. You know how it is. Anyway, the guy was mostly drunk and not making a whole lot of sense, but he did say something that caught my attention." "Which was?" "Said he'd seen a ghost." "Oh, come on, Terry. He was drunk and babbling. Probably had the DTs." Terry nodded. "Yeah, I thought the same thing, but, see, there were a couple of odd things. For one, he didn't sound as crazy as he should have, somehow, and it turns out this guy used to be some hotshot computer expert. Apparently, he had too many problems being bipolar to hold on to his job, and ended up on the streets." "Sad," she commented, "but sadly not so unusual." "No. But here's the other odd thing. We found him about 2 blocks away from where that last rape victim was found, Hollis Templeton, and he was staring toward that building while he was babbling about having seen a ghost a few weeks before. So I wondered." Jennifer wondered too. "Terry, is he back on the streets?" He grimaced. "Afraid so. But my guess is he'll still be in the area. There's a mission near where we picked him up, where guys like him can get a bed and a meal. You might try there. I don't have much of a description to give you. He was so filthy it was hard to say what he looks like. White male, maybe 40, 6 feet, not more than 160. Brown and brown." He pulled out his notebook and jotted down the name and address of the mission, as well as the man's name, then tore out the sheet and handed it to her. She accepted it, but didn't get up right away. Instead, she said wryly, "You told the file clerk to suggest I just might find what I was looking for here, didn't you, Terry?" He smiled. "You know how fast word gets around, Jen. Especially with Scott Cowan calling every station, too innocently asking about old files. So I figured one of you'd show up here sooner or later. I just asked Danny to hint we might have the files you wanted here." and then let you know I was coming? Like I said, I was going to call you about it, but I figured you might think I was just using it as an excuse and refuse to even take my call. You might have told me all this before I spent so much time in your filthy storage room. Yeah, I might have. She got to her feet, smiling. So you weren't using it as an excuse? Well, not entirely. I would have taken the call, Terry. Yeah? Yeah. She saluted him casually and left the lounge. It wasn't until she was in her car and looking at the note he'd given her that her smile faded. Another dead-end lead? Would she discover only a poor, damaged man with a damaged mind playing tricks on him? Or something else? Maggie wasn't especially eager to walk through the home of the most recent missing woman, but she knew only too well that time mattered. The sooner they could determine with certainty whether Tara Jameson had been abducted by the blindfold rapist, the better. So when Andy suggested she and John go along and check out the apartment while he talked to the fiancé who had reported her missing, she agreed. Another high-security place, John noted as they stood before the apartment building. The bastard seems to like them. Andy agreed sourly. Our department shrink says it's some kind of challenge. That maybe he goes out of his way to take the women from supposedly secure locations, even though he could get them a lot more easily when they went out to grocery shop or something. A challenge, John mused. Yeah. This is an older building, isn't it? I remember it being here 20 years ago. Yeah, but it's been updated, at least as far as security goes. Maggie, who was silently marshalling her energy and trying to narrow her focus in order to retain at least some kind of detachment, only half listened until they entered the building, checked in at the security desk, and Andy asked her where she wanted to start. The fiancé is waiting in her apartment with one of my people, he added. Maggie looked around the bright lobby. This is awfully public. Is there a service elevator? Yeah, down that hallway there, and it's the only one that goes to the basement. It was checked out, even though the security videotapes for both were here, and the basement access door don't show anyone the guards didn't okay in the areas, and nothing at all suspicious. He nodded toward the security desk, and the two guards who were watching them warily. Still, it's the most likely way for him to get her out of the building, right? I'd say so. Then I want to start there. Go up to her floor in that elevator. I'll go with you, John said. Maggie didn't object, just nodded. 8th floor, Andy told them. Apartment 804. I'll be there with her fiancé. He headed off toward the regular elevators. Are you sure you're up to this? John asked her abruptly. Why wouldn't I be? Maggie, you were upset when you got to the hotel this morning, and you're still upset. When you went home last night, you were more tired than anything else, so I can't help wondering what happened later. She was only a little surprised. Either his perception was sharpening where she was concerned, or else she wasn't hiding her tension very well. It was a nightmare, that's all. I didn't sleep well. John had the feeling she had evaded the subject and yet hadn't really lied to him, which made him all the more curious to find out the whole truth. But all he said was, You don't have your sketchpad today. It's the first time. So, I don't always carry it. I think you usually do, especially during an ongoing investigation. Maggie shrugged. Usually, not always. So why not today? Maybe I forgot it. Did you? No. Well, then... She looked at him for a moment, then shook her head. Never mind. The only thing I'm thinking about right now is whether Tara Jameson is or isn't the 6th victim. John followed as she moved toward the service elevator. You know, You could just try saying it's none of my business, he commented mildly. I guess I could, she murmured. He decided to take a chance and push just a little bit. Unless maybe it is. I think you're too honest to lie about that. So is it my business, Maggie? Is there something you're not quite sure you should tell me? She glanced at him, then drew a breath and said calmly, Several things, actually, but not here and not now, okay? Bearing in mind Quentin's warning, John got a grip on his curiosity and nodded. Okay. A flicker of gratitude crossed her face, which made him glad he'd agreed. It also made him wonder even more what could have upset her so much. Clearly, she wasn't looking forward to telling him about it. Maggie paused in the hallway a few feet from the service elevator, and visibly braced herself. John was hardly given to premonitions, but a sudden uneasy impulse made him say, Maybe this isn't a good idea. She looked at him gravely. Why not? Because I might imagine something terrible? But my own imagination can't hurt me. Can it, John? He chose his words carefully. After what I saw in the Mitchell house, I know it's more than imagination, Maggie. I don't want to see you hurt like that again. Maggie almost reached out and touched him, wanting to reassure him, needing to, but stopped herself with an effort she hoped didn't show. Steadily she said, If Tara Jameson is the sixth victim, she's the one hurting right now. Whatever I feel is temporary. That doesn't mean it hurts any less. Instead of denying that, she merely said, I'll be fine. She didn't give him a chance to protest again, but went to the service elevator and pushed the button. The doors opened almost immediately, and before she stepped inside, Maggie cautiously allowed her inner senses to reach in and probe the innocent-looking cubicle. The elevator was well used, and at first all she got was a jumble of images and flashes of emotion, mostly irritation and low-level anxiety. Not unusual, she knew, for a building in which often harried, stressed people lived and visited. Then, on the extreme edges of her awareness, she felt something. Alien. Dark. Hungry. Cold. So cold. It grew stronger, pressing in on Maggie until she found it difficult to breathe. The darkness was black, viscous, slimy like an oil slick, and it wrapped around the hunger that was cold and grotesque in its twisted urgency. Maggie? She blinked and looked at John, at his hand gripping her arm, and wondered vaguely what her face looked like to make him feel so much concern. As if a door had closed, or opened. All she could sense right now was him, his worry about her, and other, less defined but no less powerful emotions. I'm fine, she murmured. Are you? Then why did you say that? Say what? She didn't remember saying anything aloud. You said, deliver us from evil, almost as if you were reciting the prayer. After a moment, Maggie pulled her arm gently from his grasp. Funny. I'm not even religious. She tried to focus again, recapture that cold, dark presence. But all she could feel right now was John, even without the physical contact. As if that door that had opened refused now to be closed. And a very large part of her wanted to burrow in and surround herself with him, luxuriate in the warmth and strength that was more familiar and yet more tantalizing than anything she could remember feeling before. Maggie, what is it? What did you sense? She wondered if he was even aware of the term he had used, but didn't ask. She stepped into the elevator and watched him follow, watched her own finger push the button for the 8th floor. Only when the doors closed did she ask a question of her own. "Have you ever wondered about the nature of evil?" He was frowning at her, still disturbed. "I don't know that I have. Why? Is that what you felt? Evil?"
Maggie nodded. "Evil. Him. He was here. In the elevator. It's the first time I've been able to feel him like that."
And she didn't even try to explain how horribly unnerving that was. "How can you be sure it was him?"
"His desire wasn't normal. The hunger he was feeling."
"Christ," John muttered.
"I'm sorry, but you asked."
His mouth tightened. "What do you sense now?"
"Nothing, really."
"You?"
"It was just a flash. Maybe what he was feeling right before he left the elevator."
"Did he have her with him?"
Maggie frowned, only then realizing. "I don't think so. I mean, I don't think he had her here in the elevator. But I'm certain he'd taken her because he was anticipating what he would do with her."
"But he didn't take her down in the elevator?"
"No."
As the elevator doors opened on the 8th floor, John was saying, "Then how the hell did he get her out of the building?"
"I don't know."
They both looked around as they moved down the hall toward apartment 804, John silently gesturing toward the security camera positioned to get a clear view of the entire hallway. It didn't seem possible that anyone could have carried an unconscious woman from any of the apartments without being observed, and taped, by security. "Somehow he must have tampered with the system," John said, "but that still doesn't explain how he got her out of the building."
Maggie stopped suddenly, getting another flash of that darkness, as well as a sense of determination, of effort.
"It was difficult," she murmured.
"It took more strength than he expected."
"What did?" John asked quietly.
"Getting her out of here."
"How did he do that, Maggie?"
Her head turned slowly as she scanned the hallway, other apartment doors, a few tall green plants and occasional tables and framed prints and mirrors providing pleasant decoration, fire extinguishers and glassed-in fire hoses placed strategically here and there,
"Nearly rusted shut."
Her gaze fixed on a large gilded mirror halfway between the elevator and Tara Jameson's apartment, and she walked toward it slowly. She was disconcerted when she saw her own reflection, wondering idly why she was so pale and why her eyes looked so peculiar, the pupils enormous. Then John came up behind her and she stared at his reflection, briefly confused by what she saw. No, that wasn't right. He was
"Nearly rusted shut." "Maggie?"
"It's behind the mirror," she said. He moved her gently aside and used his handkerchief to avoid leaving fingerprints as he carefully pulled the heavy mirror far enough away from the wall so he could look behind it.
"Son of a bitch! An old laundry chute. A big one."
"It was almost rusted shut," Maggie said, "but he got it open." John eased the mirror back into place, his face grim.
"So that's how he did it. Dropped her in this, probably with some kind of cart waiting underneath the chute opening in the basement to catch her, then took her out."
"That's how he did it. Though I still don't know how the cameras missed him." She swayed slightly and felt John's hand grip her arm. "Sorry. I seem to be a little tired."
"I'm taking you home," he said.
"But I should—"
"Maggie, do you have any doubt that Tara Jameson is the 6th victim?"
"No."
Then you don't need to go into that apartment.
Yes, I do. John, what if I can sense more of him in there? What if I can get something that could tell us who he is?
You haven't been able to before.
No. Not until the elevator. Not until now. So I have to try.
John muttered a curse under his breath, but didn't try to stop her when she moved toward the apartment. He also didn't let go of her arm. Expecting them, Andy had left the apartment door ajar, and as soon as they crossed the threshold, they could hear him just beyond the foyer talking to Tara Jameson's fiancé. Maggie eased her arm free of John's grasp and took a step away from him, trying to concentrate, to focus. And this time it was with an almost brutal suddenness that knocked the breath out of her that she felt the wave of terror. The iron arms holding her from behind, the bite of chloroform. And something else. That cold, dark, twisted hunger. And familiarity. Maggie? She found herself once more supported by John, his touch bringing her out of it and wrapping her in warmth and worry. Through a throat that felt strangely constricted, Maggie said, "He knows her, John. He knows her." Hollis? She came awake abruptly, riding out the usual first moment of panic, of wondering why it was dark and what the weight across her eyes was. Then she was awake, aware, napping in her chair in front of the window. Hollis?
Yes, I'm awake. Why am I awake?
Hollis, we're running out of time. I've tried, but I can't. She won't let me in.
Who? Who are you talking about?
Hollis, listen to me. And trust me, you have to trust me.
I don't even know your name.
Is that important?
Well, yes, I think so. If I keep on calling you Figment, somebody's going to hear me talking to you and lock me away. At least with a proper name, I can claim you're my imaginary friend. That's probably what you are anyway.
All right, Hollis. My name is Annie.
Annie. That's a nice name. Okay, Annie. Now, why should I trust you?
Because you're the only one I've been able to clearly reach. And because you have to help me.
Help you do what?
Help me to save her. And there isn't much time. He's seen her now. He's seen her, and he wants her too.
Hollis felt a chill crawl up her spine. Do you mean the man who attacked me?
Yes. We have to try to save her, Hollis. I can't reach her, but you can. You have to warn her.
Hollis sat there for a moment longer, her fingers gripping the arms of her chair tightly. But then she swallowed and said, I'm a blind woman, Annie. What can I do?
Will you help me?
Just tell me what you want me to do. It took hardly more than 15 minutes to drive to Maggie's small house in a quiet suburb of the city. Since it was dark by the time they arrived, John didn't bother trying to form an impression of the house, just followed her inside. Almost as soon as they crossed the threshold, he saw her shoulders shift slightly, as though throwing off a burden, and he thought, Quentin was right again. This place is her sanctuary. The living room they stepped into was very much Maggie, he thought. Nothing fancy, but obviously good quality. The furniture was comfortable and casual, and the slight clutter of books and magazines combined with the riotous growth of numerous green plants gave the room a cozy, lived-in feeling. There were several framed paintings on the walls, and one impressionist-style work propped on the fireplace mantel that struck a vague chord of familiarity in him. "Nice place," he commented. "Thanks," Maggie shrugged out of her flannel shirt and tossed it over a chair, and the close-fitting black sweater she wore underneath was a startling reminder to him of just how slender she was. All that hair and the layers of clothing she invariably wore were both deceptive, he decided, and he had a shrewd hunch she used the camouflage quite deliberately. "I could use some coffee," she said, pushing her hair back away from her face with both hands in an absent gesture. She was still too pale and obviously tired. "You? I'd offer something stronger, but since I don't drink, I usually don't have anything on hand." "Coffee's fine." John knew he should leave her alone to rest, but he was reluctant to leave her at all. "Coming up. Make yourself at home." She headed off toward the kitchen. John followed, saying, "Mind if I keep you company?" "No, not at all." She gestured toward the 3 comfortably wide and strong-looking stools on one side of the big center work island, and moved toward the sink on the other side. "Have a seat. When I moved in here, I remodeled and commandeered what used to be the dining room for part of my studio. A studio I needed. The dining room was wasted space." "Your guests probably end up in here anyway," he said, shrugging out of his leather jacket and hanging it over the back of one of the stools as he looked around at the bright, spacious French country kitchen. "Usually," she agreed. He sat down. "I'm not surprised. This is a wonderful room." She eyed him while measuring what looked like freshly ground coffee into an honest-to-God percolator. "I would have figured you for a different style. More classical, maybe." He was only a little surprised. She was an artist, after all, and undoubtedly given to summing up personal style fairly quickly. "Generally speaking, that is more my style. But I like a lot of what's popular now, like this room, French country, but more French than country." Maggie smiled. "I'm not overly fond of roosters or sunflowers, to say nothing of chintz. This works for me." John watched her more intently than he realized, wanting to take advantage of this time to gain a better understanding of Maggie. It was becoming more important to him, and he didn't bother to ask himself why. With the coffee started, she got milk from the refrigerator and put it on the work island, then went back to get 2 cups from the cabinet, saying abruptly, "Back at the station, when you were singing the praises of Quentin and Kendra, I noticed you didn't mention their psychic abilities." "No, I didn't." "Still an unbeliever?" she asked, half mocking and half not. "I don't even think that was it. Maybe I just wanted to keep everything grounded." "Grounded in reality?" "No, just grounded in the ordinary, the expected. Andy is pretty open-minded, didn't even blink when he found out about you. But I wasn't sure about Scott and Jennifer." Maggie did understand. Despite the desire to keep things grounded, what she sensed in him was doubt and uncertainty, and the dawning, reluctant seeds of belief. She had caught a bit of that earlier, which was why she'd decided to talk to him, at least about some of it. Maybe show him the painting. Slowly she said, "But that's the point, isn't it?" "What do you mean?" "You say you want this investigation to be grounded. Grounded in the ordinary, the expected. Only that isn't where it is. That isn't where it is at all." Chapter 12. Maggie. Think about it. An ordinary investigation? The best lead we have to date as to how this animal is choosing his victims is found in police files nearly 70 years old. Is that the ordinary, the expected? "No," he admitted. "You yourself brought in an avowed psychic, 2, actually, because you knew they could help,
And even before that, you wanted my help. Not the help of a police sketch artist. The help of someone with a knack. A paranormal knack. Again, her smile was wry. Hell, John, you've known from the beginning there was nothing in the least ordinary or expected about any of this. He thought about that while she stepped away to pour the coffee, and had to admit, somewhat ruefully, that she was right. He himself had always had an instinctive knack for choosing the right people for the right task. It was one of the reasons he'd gone so far and achieved so much in business. Why wouldn't it apply to this situation as much as any other? Okay, point taken, he said, as she pushed his coffee cup across the island to him. But are you willing to go beyond the point? To accept the extraordinary and look for the unexpected? I don't know, he admitted honestly. I'm ready to try, if that means anything. Maggie had already made up her mind to do this, but she still had to be careful. Very careful. She sipped her coffee, watching as he added milk to his, then said, I guess it'll have to be enough, won't it? I hope so. She nodded, then drew a breath. I have a brother. Half-brother, really. We had the same mother. But he's a seer, like Quentin, and he's helped me to make sense of some things in my life. Certain instincts, dreams, the things I feel, and the images burned into my soul. What kind of images? She hesitated, then shook her head. I'll get to that later. Anyway, my brother and I both inherited Mother's artistic tendencies, to differing degrees. Beau got the genius. I got just enough for what I needed to be able to do. Which is? Draw the face of evil. John looked at her searchingly. Andy says you could be any kind of artist you wanted to be, that you have talent to spare. Judging from the sketch of Christina, I agree. I probably could have been pretty good if I'd worked at it. She shrugged, dismissing something obviously unimportant to her. But what I needed to do required less skill than intuition. You mean your empathic ability? Yes. John frowned, remembering the terror, pain, and shock he had seen her endure. You had to suffer to draw the face of evil. She hesitated, then said, I don't think I could draw it otherwise. I don't think anyone could. For some things, knowledge isn't enough. Imagination isn't enough. You have to feel to understand. Only evil? Particularly evil. Then you've drawn the face of evil? Maggie laughed without humor. Again and again. But there are degrees of evil, just like anything else. The lesser face of evil is the man who kills a bank guard in cold blood to get the money. The man who rapes his own wife every single night because he thinks he has the right to. The woman who poisons her child because she craves the sympathy and attention it brings to her. The minister who molests the boys who come trustingly to him. The nurse who murders her patients because she thinks the resources being used to care for them could better be used somewhere else. Christ, John muttered. Lesser evil? Maggie, are all those examples of past investigations? Yes. Investigations you were involved in? Yes. He couldn't even imagine what she must have gone through. And even as that realization crossed his mind, he suddenly understood what she meant about experiencing evil. Even with the skills of an artist, he couldn't have drawn it. Not even a knowledgeable and imaginative mind could wrap itself around some things enough to understand them, simply because they were beyond all knowledge and comprehension, beyond even the imagination's ability to transcend understanding. Some things literally did have to be felt to be understood. He gazed across the width of the island at her calm face with its haunting eyes, and finally understood why compassion and perception were literally stamped into her regular, not quite beautiful features. Because she suffered. Because she understood the worst men and women could do to themselves and each other and their children in a way that he would never, could never, comprehend. It was a long moment before he could speak, but finally he said, "If all that is lesser evil, then what in God's name is greater evil?" "Evil that doesn't die." John shook his head. "I don't understand. Everything dies, eventually." Maggie hesitated for a minute, obviously struggling, though whether for words or the decision to go into this with him, he couldn't have said. "If the universe is balance, then evil is the negative force, always opposed by a positive force, always kept in check, at least to some extent. But what if a particular positive force in a particular place and a particular moment doesn't do what it's supposed to do, what it's intended, designed to do? There's a glitch somewhere, a hesitation, a mistake. And that evil isn't balanced, isn't negated by anything positive. Nothing stops it from growing, and growing more powerful, more sure of itself. Until not even the death of the flesh can destroy it. The body dies, but the negative force within it survives? Is that what you're saying?" "Yes. It survives. Finds itself another vessel so that it's reborn in the flesh, and destroys again. It becomes an eternal evil. So the universe fights to restore the balance, because the balance is its natural state. A positive force meant to negate that evil is reborn as well, sent once again to do what it was meant to do the first time around." "You're talking about reincarnation." She shrugged very slightly, her eyes never leaving his. "I'm talking about balance. A negative force has to be opposed by a positive force in order to maintain or restore that balance. We see it in science all the time. For every action there is an equal and opposite reaction." John nodded. "I remember that much, and it makes sense. But we were talking about evil." "Yes, we were." "Eternal evil. That's the greater evil you have to draw. An evil that won't die?" John really hoped disbelief didn't echo in his voice, but he was very much afraid it did. This was just a bit more than he had bargained for. Hell, who was he kidding? It was a lot more than he had bargained for. Maggie looked at him for a long moment, then set her cup down on the island. "I can't show you the face of that evil, because I can't see it yet. But I can show you what it sees, what it does." This, he realized, was what Maggie had brought him here to see. "Okay." She came around the island and gestured for him to follow as she led the way to her studio. It was a very large room, obviously, though skillfully added to the original house, and it looked the way most artists' studios looked, with a big work table holding supplies, and shelves on one wall containing various props and bolts of material. There were bins holding canvases of various sizes, a number of completed paintings leaning against the walls, but angled so that they weren't clearly visible to him, and one on an easel in the center of the room. She didn't warn him, and the shock he felt when he looked at that painting was cold, overwhelming, visceral. "Jesus Christ," he heard himself say hoarsely. "I wish I could destroy it." Leaning back against the work table, arms folded tightly as if she were cold, Maggie stared at the painting with a fixed intensity that was almost painful. "I want to destroy it. But the ironic thing is, it's the best work I've ever done. I seem to be too much an artist to destroy my best work, no matter how horrible it is." He tore his gaze from the painting to look at her for a moment, then moved closer to the easel and forced himself to study it as calmly as possible. Maggie was right. It was horrible. But she was also right in saying the work was technically superb, with an extraordinary savage power he'd never seen equaled. It was almost impossible to believe such force had come from Maggie, had emerged from that slender body, from a spirit so sensitive it could literally feel the pain of others. Trying to get past that, he concentrated on studying the dead woman, barely able to ignore the nausea at what had been done to her. Maggie said, "This is how I knew she was dead, John. You wondered about that, didn't you? This is how I knew. Because I painted this. Last night, I painted this." He looked at her quickly. "Who is this, Maggie?" "Samantha Mitchell. And I've never seen her, so how could I have painted her if this wasn't real?" John studied the painting again, this time more carefully, then turned and went to Maggie. "It isn't her." "What?" "I saw the photograph of Samantha Mitchell, remember? In the case file. Maggie, she looks completely different from this woman. She has short reddish hair and freckles, an upturned nose." Maggie stared at him. "Not... Then who is she?" "I don't know, but I think we'd better find out." It was already dark by the time Jennifer got to the Fellowship rescue mission, and since the night promised to be a wet and chilly one, half the available beds had already been claimed by people in need. She only glanced into the 2 large dormitory-style rooms downstairs, one for men and one for women. Her cots were lined in neat rows, literally wall to wall. With the poor description of the man she was looking for, she doubted her ability to recognize him by sight, and so went in search of somebody in charge. She found Nancy Fraser, the surprisingly young and extremely placid director of the mission, just coming out of an upstairs room with an armful of blankets. After peering short-sightedly at Jennifer's badge, the director listened to what she had to say and frowned. "David Robeson? It's not a name I know, but then most of them don't offer names, especially if they're just passing through. You say he was arrested the other day?" "Yeah, for causing a disturbance, but nothing serious. He was out within 24 hours. She offered the brief description that was all she had. "And you're trying to find him?" "Because he may have witnessed a crime or seen something that could help us solve one." "I'd like to help, Detective, but I can't say if he'd even been here before, not by the name or description. You're welcome to ask other staff members, or even some of our regulars, though I will request that you not disturb those already resting for the night." "I understand." Fraser nodded, then added, "Oh, and I should tell you that we tend to have at least a few new people here most days of the week, so if you don't find him tonight, you might try again in a day or 2. "I'll do that," Jennifer said, hoping she wouldn't have to. But by the time she had talked to nearly a dozen men who had no clue who David Robeson was, and another 3 who weren't sure of their own names, she was more or less resigned to not finding him tonight. She left her card with Nancy Fraser, saying, "It's a long shot, but if you should hear his name, I'd appreciate a call." The director accepted the card and frowned, asking abruptly, "Is it about that rapist? I know they found one of the women only a few blocks from here." Jennifer nodded. "Yeah, this David Robeson may have seen something. Probably not, but we're pursuing every lead." With a nod back toward the women's dormitory, Fraser said, "Our female population has more than doubled in the last few weeks. A lot of scared women out there, and even the men are nervous, I'd say. Look, I'll ask around, okay? Some of them may talk to me when they wouldn't say squat to you. If I find out anything at all about this man, I'll call you."
"Thank you."
Jennifer made her way back out to her car, depressed as always by the homeless, rootless, or just plain mindless people, most of whom certainly deserved more out of life than a narrow cot in a room full of strangers. She unlocked her car, gazing absently toward the Mission as she watched a couple of bearded men dressed in ancient army jackets standing outside, smoking. She grimaced when one of the men stooped to pick up a discarded cigarette from the sidewalk and then put the filter end between his lips without hesitation. It was only then that she realized she was rubbing the nape of her neck. She stopped, aware now of the tingling, uneasy sensation. Moving her head no more than necessary, she shifted her gaze to sweep the area, trying to see whatever it was that had put her instincts on alert. There weren't many people about, and those were grouped near the Mission, unthreatening as far as she could tell. A damp, chilly breeze had sprung up, and she could hear it stirring trash in the gutter on the other side of the street and rattling a loose street sign nearby. But as far as she could determine, there was nothing else. Nothing to make her feel so uneasy. "Jumping at shadows, Seaton," she muttered. She got into her car, locking the doors immediately, and sat there for a moment. She was tired and more than a little bit unnerved to find her thoughts drifting toward Terry. She glanced at her watch, wavered for just a bit, then swore under her breath and started the car to head back to the station. Later, she thought. There'd be time later for Terry. "It sounds like Tara Jameson," Andy reported. "According to descriptions and the photo we have, she's very delicate, almost childlike. Dark hair, long and straight, almond-shaped dark eyes, high cheekbones, sensitive mouth." "You're still at the apartment?" John had called Andy on his cell phone. "Yeah." "And?" "Forensics turned up a few human hairs in the laundry chute, so you two were probably right about that being the way he got her down to the basement. From there it looks like he took her out of the building through a service door that was supposed to be securely locked. It wasn't forced, but picked by somebody who knew what he was doing. We still don't know how the bastard managed to avoid getting his picture taken by the security cameras, but I've got my people looking at all the tapes and checking out the computer that runs this place's electronic system. Her door wasn't forced. The apartment's security system was deactivated with her own code. All par for the course for this guy. Have you had any luck trying to find whoever sent the ransom note to Mitchell?" "Not so far." Andy lowered his voice. "So if your FBI buddy finds anything, let me know pronto." "I will." When he closed his phone and dropped it into a pocket, Maggie said steadily, "It's her, isn't it? The painting is of Tara Jameson." John half turned on the couch to look at her where she sat curled up at the opposite end. "From the description Andy gave me, yes." She drew a breath and leaned her head back against the couch, looking at him. "I thought it was Samantha." "No, it definitely isn't her. And knowing that, do you still believe Samantha's dead?" "Yes." Maggie didn't hesitate. John was trying his best to understand this, but couldn't help wondering if at least some of what he was hearing now was nothing more than symptoms of a mental deterioration Quentin and Kendra had hinted was possible. What if Maggie had simply suffered too much? "I'm not losing it, John." Her voice was very quiet, and she smiled faintly when he gave her a startled look. "No, I can't read your mind, but I do have a sense of how you're feeling. And I know you're worried about me. Don't be. At least not about this. I'm okay." "Are you?" "Yeah. Tired and unnerved. I won't deny that. But otherwise okay." "And the painting? How were you able to paint something that didn't yet exist?" She drew a breath and let it out slowly. "I don't know. I mean, I don't understand it myself. All I know is that if he hasn't done that to her yet, he will. Unless we stop him. But you can't see the future. No, I can't see the future. She managed a faint smile. I did ask if you were ready to accept the extraordinary and look for the unexpected. Yeah, but this? You talk about an evil that won't die, about balance that has to be restored, and then show me a painting of a tortured dead woman you say you painted even before she was abducted. I don't know, Maggie. I just don't know how to make sense of this. Maggie couldn't really blame him. And what about your connection to it all? If you can't see the future, and your psychic ability is limited to feelings, then how can you be so certain this bastard we're after is some kind of eternal evil? Because you feel it? Yes, and because I felt it before. When? She hesitated, wondering if there was any chance at all he could accept this. In 1934. After a long moment of silence, John said, I really wish you had something stronger than coffee in the house. Yeah, me too. He drew a breath and let it out slowly. You're saying you lived, then? That you were another person living another life? That's what I'm saying. And you knew this eternal evil then? He was attacking women then the way he is now. I know that. When Andy and the others showed us those pictures of women killed back then, I knew it was him. Not a copycat killer borrowing somebody else's rituals. But him. Because you felt it. She nodded. I don't know anything that could help the investigation. Nothing that could help us find him, catch him. I don't know what he looks like, what his name is. I don't even know why he's picking women who look like the ones he killed back then. All I know is that the evil inside him has been alive a long, long time. And I know it's my fault. What? Balance, remember? A positive force intended to oppose a negative one. Somehow, I was supposed to stop him. Back in the beginning, before his evil grew too strong, I was somehow in a position to change whatever happened then. To stop him. Destroy him, or maybe just turn him in a different direction. I don't know for sure. I don't remember. I just feel. And if what you feel is wrong? It isn't. How can you be so damn sure? Maggie, what you're talking about is incredible, to say the least. You failed to stop a killer a lifetime ago, and because of that, he became some kind of unstoppable evil? He isn't unstoppable. He just hasn't been stopped. Up to now. And you have to stop him now? She nodded. I have to stop him. Because I didn't before. I can't move on until I do what I'm supposed to do. And I have a very strong feeling this is my last chance to correct that mistake. Maybe we only get so many chances, I don't know. Maybe if I fail this time, someone else gets a shot at restoring the balance, and I get sent back to learn the lesson a different way. I just know that it's my responsibility this time around. I have to stop him. Karma. If it makes more sense to you to put it that way. Fate. Destiny. We're connected, he and I, tied together by a mistake. If there's anything I know, anything I'm absolutely certain of, it's that once you've touched evil, I mean really touched it, you're forever changed. In a way, you are bound to it, tied to it, so that it becomes a part of you. There's nothing evil in you, he said immediately. Oh, but there is. It's not my evil, but I carry it inside me. That painting proves it. He's evil. I carry his evil in my own soul. and I have for a long, long time." Suddenly, John understood. "That's why you do it. That's why you surround yourself with victims, suffer right along with them. It's atonement, isn't it, Maggie?" For the first time, she avoided his steady gaze. "Consciously? No. Not at first. But I've always been drawn to people in pain. Always felt a kind of relief if I could help them in some way. Gradually, over the years, I realized there was something I was trying to fix. Some mistake I wanted to correct. I didn't know what it was. Not then. It wasn't until Laura Hughes was attacked that I began to understand the truth." "Truth?" Unable to be still any longer, John rose and began wandering around the room, not quite pacing. "Christ." "I know it all sounds unbelievable." "You could say that, yeah." "It is the truth, John. I wish it wasn't. I wish this was all about one evil man doing evil things in a single lifetime, something we could both accept even if not understand. But that isn't what it's about. That's never been what it's about."
"Jesus, Maggie."
"I'm sorry, but you had to know the truth about it." He swung around to stare at her.
"So is this where you also tell me the truth about Christina?"
Maggie was honestly startled.
"How did you—" "I don't have to be psychic to know there's more to her death than what you've told me. Why do you think I kept after you about it? What do you know about her death, Maggie?"
His cell phone rang before she could formulate an answer, but Maggie didn't feel much of a sense of reprieve. From the determination on his face, she doubted he would accept anything less than the truth this time.
"Yeah, hello."
He listened for a moment, then went to a notepad Maggie kept by her living-room phone and quickly jotted something down.
"Okay, yeah, I've got it. I'll call Andy and tell him. You won't do anything stupid, will you?"
He listened a minute longer, then said,
"Well, listen to Kendra and stay put, okay? Let Andy and his people take care of it." "Yeah, I will."
When he ended the call, Maggie said, "I take it Quentin and Kendra found whoever sent that ransom note."
"They have a name and an address."
He called Andy's cell phone and repeated the information, adding,
"Quentin says the information is solid, and he's pretty sure this Brady Oliver either knows where Samantha Mitchell is or knows someone who does. No information on whether she's alive or dead." "Yeah. No, I'm at Maggie's. For a while, probably. Call me on my cell in case I'm in transit, okay?"
He listened a moment longer, then said,
"Yeah, I'll tell her."
He closed the phone. "Tell me what?"
He said he just called in to check for messages and found one from Hollis Templeton. She wants to see you as soon as possible.
He doesn't know why?
No, just that she needs to talk to you.
Maggie looked at her watch. "Visiting hours will be over for the night by the time I can get there."
Andy said he's cleared it with the hospital if you want to go tonight, but if you're too tired, tomorrow is probably soon enough.
Maggie wasn't so sure. Hollis wouldn't have called if it wasn't important. I'd better go now.
I'll drive.
Chapter 13. It didn't take Scott and Jennifer more than half an hour to find Brady Oliver at the address provided and bring him in for questioning. He turned out to be a small-time crook with delusions of grandeur, and crumbled almost before Andy could even begin to get hard-nosed about the probably legal consequences of passing oneself off as a kidnapper. "I never took her, I swear. I just found her is all, and why shouldn't I try to make a few bucks on a lucky chance? Her old man would never miss it, and she don't care no more, right?" Andy stared at him, thinking once again that it was a hell of a world they lived in, and feeling a chill. From the sound of it, Samantha Mitchell was already dead.
"Where is she, Brady?"
Bloodshot eyes shifted nervously. "First, we gotta talk about this kidnapping rap, 'cause I never took her, I just found her." Andy leaned toward him and said gently,
"Well,
I'll tell you what, Brady. Let's say I invite Samantha Mitchell's husband in here to meet you, and you can explain it all to him. Oh, hell no, don't do that. Where is she? I just want to... Where is she? All's I'm asking is... Andy rose to his feet. Okay. There's a dump not too far from my place, an old abandoned building. City wants to tear it down, but there's no money to rebuild, something like that. I go there sometimes and look for stuff I can sell. He rattled off the address, looking acutely unhappy. First floor, back room. She's dead, isn't she, Brady? I didn't do her, I swear. Andy felt very tired. He said, My people are going to check out the address. You'll wait right here. I want a lawyer, Brady whined. You haven't been charged with anything. Yet. Oh, well then, I want a Coke. Andy left the interview room without responding, and before he gave in to the temptation to rid the human gene pool of one extremely stupid and vicious little possible breeder. As soon as he shut the door behind him, Jennifer came out of the observation room and said, We heard, Andy. Scott's rounding up the rest and putting forensics on alert. Do you think that piece of scum in there really just found her? Nodding, Andy said, If Brady had killed her, he would have been hiding in the deepest hole he could find, and wouldn't have opened his trap, except to ask for a lawyer. Since he just found her, he figures he's safe. Stupid bastard. So she's dead? Yeah, she's dead. Come on, let's go. You and Scott can ride with me. They collected the others from the bullpen and went out to their cars. On the point of getting into his own car, Andy noticed Jennifer still on the sidewalk. She was looking around with a frown, obviously disturbed. What? He said. Did you hear something? I heard a lot. Traffic, voices, a horn blowing a couple of blocks away. She shook her head, moving toward the passenger side finally, but still frowning. No, something else. Scott said, I didn't hear anything weird, Jen. What did it sound like? Just... I could have sworn somebody said my name, that's all. My imagination, I guess. She shivered visibly and got into the car. Andy paused a moment to look around carefully, but he didn't see or hear anything unusual. Even so, he didn't dismiss Jennifer's uneasiness, especially added to the fact that someone had apparently gotten into her locked car not so long ago. He looked around a final time, then got into the car, making a mental note to do something about security around the station. But that resolution was pushed to the back of his mind by the time they reached the address Brady Oliver had given them. Loath to disturb any evidence, Andy stationed most of his people around the building with instructions to tape off the entire thing for forensics, while he went in with only Scott and Jennifer as backup. Their flashlights showed them a dirty, ramshackle place that had long ago been stripped to its bare bones. The floor creaked underfoot, and as they entered they could all hear faint, scratchy whisperings and scurryings. "What the hell's that?" Scott demanded, jumpy and not apologetic about it. "Rats," Andy told him. "You two stay behind me. We'll check out the room Brady said he found her in first." With sudden realization, Scott said, "Rats. If the lady's here, and she's been dead very long—" "Don't think about it," Jennifer urged him, her own voice a bit thickened. Andy hesitated, wondering if he should have left the two of them outside. Both had witnessed scenes of homicide before, but he knew they were very involved in this case and that their emotions were heightened because of that. Still, even that was part of being a cop. He moved on, slow and careful. The long hallway led to the back of the building, where there were half a dozen rooms, their doors long gone, and empty doorways with broken casings leaned drunkenly open. Andy wondered why the whole building hadn't collapsed long ago. He paused, shining his light around, then moved suddenly toward the doorway to the room on the far left corner. He could smell the blood. There was no need to go more than a step into the room. His flashlight found her immediately. "Oh, Christ," Scott muttered. Andy said nothing, but he heard Jennifer give a little sigh and didn't have to ask to know what both of them were feeling, because he felt the same. Horror, revulsion, pain, an overwhelming sadness. Samantha Mitchell lay spread-eagled on a blood-stained mattress in the far corner. Her naked body was bruised and battered. Her eyes were gone, and her throat was cut almost ear to ear. The rats had indeed gotten to her body. Even more horribly, a deep slash opened the lower curve of her rounded belly, and between her thighs lay the pitifully small, curled body of her dead child, still connected to her body by the umbilical cord.
"From the moment we met, there was an unusual bond between Christina and me," Maggie said. "Maybe it was because she was the first of his victims to survive the attack. I don't know. Whatever the reason, we both felt it, that closeness." "She mentioned your name a couple of times when I flew up to visit her," John said, keeping his eyes on the road as he drove. "Didn't say much, just that you were the police sketch artist, and that you'd been kind to her. That's one reason I asked Andy about you after she died, and I saw you at the funeral." Maggie was a little surprised by that. She had made a point of keeping back and being unobtrusive. "I didn't know you saw me then." "I just caught a glimpse near the end. Didn't know who you were until I recognized you last week in that interview room." He didn't add that something about her had stuck in his mind, so that all these weeks later he had remembered her the instant he had seen her at the police station. "I didn't get to spend much time with Christina," she said. "Just a couple of visits in the hospital, then 3 or 4 more after she went home. So much of her energy was just taken up with healing and with getting ready for all the surgeries she knew would follow." John glanced at Maggie quickly, but he didn't see her face clearly in the now-and-then glare of passing streetlights. "She talked about the plastic surgery?" "Yes. She was realistic about it. She knew nothing would make her look the way she did before, but the acid had done so much damage, and she just wanted to look as normal as possible. She said she didn't want to frighten children when she went out in public." John was silent for a moment, then said, "That's one of the reasons I've been so sure she didn't kill herself. She wanted to live, Maggie. I know she did. She wanted to heal and go on with her life. She was strong." "Yes, she was. Stronger than you know." "What do you mean?" Maggie drew a breath. "Once she got home, she had that elaborate computer system her husband had set up, and that new voice recognition and reading program you arranged, since she couldn't see the screen." "Yes. I didn't want her to feel cut off from everything, even if she wasn't ready to go out in public yet. Are you saying she used it for something else?" "It probably shouldn't surprise you," Maggie said. "She was your sister, after all. She wanted answers, John." "Answers? Are you saying she tried to find the man who attacked her?" "She had all the information she'd been able to find on Laura Hughes, and of course she knew her own situation and background better than anyone else. She was convinced there was a connection somewhere, that the rest of us had been blinded by so many of the details we couldn't see what was actually there." "And she believed she could? Blind and virtually alone in that apartment, she believed she could find something everyone else had missed?" "She did have a unique perspective, and she'd spent hours on end thinking about it. There really wasn't much else she could think about." Maggie sighed. "Please believe me. If I'd had even the slightest suspicion that what she was doing could have put her in danger—" John abruptly pulled the car to the curb and stopped. He turned in the seat to stare at her. "Are you saying it did? Maggie, did Christina kill herself?" "No." "No? Why the hell didn't you tell me this before? Christ, tell somebody!" "Because I can't prove it, John." She kept her voice level. "Every speck of evidence in that apartment proves that she did kill herself. Andy and his people went over it with a fine-tooth comb, you know that. They even went over it twice because you asked them to. You yourself went through her computer files, according to Andy. Did you find anything?" "No," he replied slowly. "At least, nothing out of the ordinary, nothing unexpected. There was nothing about the investigation, the other victim. No hint at all that she was trying to investigate on her own." "That's what Andy said. He even had the department computer expert check it out when I asked him to, but there was nothing. If there was any evidence before she died, it was certainly gone afterward. Nobody found anything to point to an intruder or even a visitor. Security records for that night show no one entering the apartment, and even the fact that she'd given the nurse the day and night off seems to point toward suicide. The medical examiner was absolutely positive it was suicide. No reservations at all. I read his report. You read his report. According to everything they found, Christina wrote that suicide note on her computer, then put a gun to her head and pulled the trigger." John drew a breath. "I hadn't even known she had that gun until afterward." "Not surprising, since according to the registration, she'd bought it years ago, when she first lived alone in L.A., for protection. And since it hadn't been registered here in Seattle, none of us knew about it beforehand. But if you've been blaming yourself for not knowing, don't. If there hadn't been a gun, he would have done it another way." "How the hell do you know that, Maggie? With all the evidence pointing the other way, how do you know Christina didn't kill herself?" "I told you we had a connection. A bond." Maggie turned her gaze to the windshield, still working on holding her voice level and calm. "The night she died, I woke up, hearing her scream in my mind, feeling her pain. It was just a flashing instant, but clear. So clear I'll never forget it. And what she was screaming was terror and protest. She didn't want to die. The gun in her hand pressed to her temple wasn't under her control." Jennifer was alone in the conference room looking over the arrest report she'd requested from the Central Precinct on David Robeson, when Andy came in, looking harried and tired. "Sanctuary," he muttered. "My kingdom for an hour or two of sanctuary." "I'd grant it if I could," she said sympathetically. "But you know the minute the switchboard doesn't find you at your desk, the phones in here will start ringing." "Yeah, I know." He sat down with a sigh. "You should be gone. How many hours have you put in today?" "I'm off the clock." "That's not what I asked you." Jennifer shrugged. "Look, I didn't want to go home and figured I might as well be busy." "Doing what?" She tapped the report with a finger. "Following a very unlikely lead, trying to track down a transient who might have seen something helpful." Andy grunted. "Where's Scott?" "Gone for a pizza. We were hungry and he wanted some fresh air." She watched him, worried by the circles under his eyes and the tense line of his jaw. "I guess you haven't heard anything from Maggie. I mean, about her talking to Hollis Templeton." "No, nothing yet. And whatever she's got to say might not be relevant anyway." "Do you really believe that?" "Hell no." "Yeah. Our entire world does seem to have narrowed down just to this investigation, hasn't it?" "You'd think." He sighed again. "The M.E. has promised to work on Samantha Mitchell ASAP, but neither one of us thinks he'll find anything new. One glance told him what it told the rest of us. She was alive when her throat was cut and died from blood loss." "Then that, with the baby, was done after?" Andy's jaw tightened even more. "A minute or two after, the M.E. thinks. The baby was probably still alive." Jennifer hadn't expected that, or the jolt she felt hearing it. Christ. Needless to say, we're going to try to keep that fact out of the media's hands. "Does Mitchell know?" "No, and if I have my way, he never will." She stared down at the arrest report. "Andy, is there something we're missing? Something we should have done and didn't?" "Nothing I can think of. Don't beat yourself up about it, Jen. We've had virtually no evidence, no witnesses able to give us a description, and no predictable pattern to the attacks. So far, at least. The closest we've come to a lead of any kind is thanks to you and Scott." "Some lead," she said, sounding as discouraged as she felt. "We have a few sketches and photos of victims from a string of murders in 1934, and maybe our guy somehow got access to them. But so far the only thing we can be reasonably sure of is that he's going after lookalikes." Before Andy could respond, the phone rang, and he picked up the receiver with a resigned grimace. "Yeah." He listened for a minute, absently watching Jennifer continue going through the file in front of her, then said, "Okay. Tell him I'm on my way." When he hung up the phone, Jennifer said, "Our Luke again?" Andy used the table for leverage to push himself to his feet. "Yeah, damn it." "He's still refusing to ask the FBI for help?" "He'd refuse to yell help if his pants were on fire, Jen. You know that." He sighed. "But I think we need to bring John's friends in. And I mean officially. I'm about a breath away from calling the chief directly myself." She shook her head. "Don't do that. We both know Drummond would never forgive or forget, and he could do your career a lot of damage. And maybe I don't give a shit." This time Jennifer smiled. "Yes, you do. And so do the rest of us, in case you didn't know that. We need you right where you are, Andy. But I agree it's time something drastic was done. I don't have to hear a shrink explain it to know that now he's started killing his victims outright. This bastard is only going to get more vicious with every day that passes. We have to stop him, and we have to stop him soon. Is there another way around Drummond? A way to bring pressure to bear on him without any of us sticking our necks out?" "Maybe. I hate not being able to handle this ourselves, though." Isn't that sort of the way our Luke is thinking?" He stared at her. "Christ, you're right. You'd think I've learned by now to yell for help when I need it." "John could help, I'll bet," she suggested. "I think Maggie could as well, the way the chief feels about her. And you know both of them would in a heartbeat, if it means we'd have a better chance of stopping this monster. I'll bet neither one has yet, only because they don't want to step on your toes." "Yeah, probably." "I don't know if these agents can help us," Jennifer said steadily. "But from all John said, they have a hell of a lot of experience in tracking monsters, and both of them are profilers. They may be able to tell us something we'd never come up with ourselves. I think we need to hear whatever they've got to say." "I think you're right." Andy nodded and turned away from the conference table, adding, "I might try Maggie first, mostly because I think both the chief and Drummond would take that a bit better. But we'll see." Jennifer didn't want to admit either to him or herself how relieved she felt. It wasn't that she didn't feel herself or her co-workers capable of solving a string of brutal attacks. It was just that she was afraid that without help, the solution might well come at a very high price. And with 6 women attacked so far, 3 of them dead, the price was already too high. Maggie knew she had no business talking to Hollis. Not tonight. The previous day had been an emotional ordeal, and today hadn't been much better. Discussing the unbelievable, even the unthinkable, with John, had demanded such absolute mastery of her own emotions that the aftermath left her feeling drained and incredibly weary. So she was feeling more than a little vulnerable when she knocked, pushed open Hollis's door, and went into the hospital room where the other woman was sitting as usual in one of the 2 chairs near the window. As soon as Maggie came in, Hollis said, "The nurses are pissed at me. They want me in bed, or at least ready to be there. Can't understand why I won't at least get undressed." "Why won't you?" Maggie asked, sitting down and absently opening her sketchpad to a clean page. "Because I don't feel so defenseless, I suppose." Her hands were gripping the arms of her chair, knuckles whitened tensely. "Or maybe just because I'm sick of that damned bed." "I can't say I blame you for that. You must be sick of being here at all. Will your doctors let you go home after the bandages come off on Thursday?" "They aren't saying, but I gather it depends on how the operation turned out. If I can see, I'll be ready to go home. If I can't—" Maggie didn't need to hear the rest. If she remained blind, then Hollis would need further medical help to adjust to that fact, especially after having her hopes raised by the operation. She hesitated, then said, "I don't know how you feel about the so-called paranormal." Hollis gave a peculiar little laugh. "Funny you should say that." "Why?" "I'll explain later. I feel fairly open-minded about it, all things considered." "Why?" "Because someone I trust, someone who happens to have the ability to see the future, told me that whether you see again is entirely up to you." "That sounds fairly enigmatic." Hollis didn't sound either convinced or unconvinced, merely neutral. "I know. I didn't understand it myself. But the more I think about it, the more I'm convinced he meant that while the operation could be an unqualified success, there's a lot the mind has to accept before everything works as it should." "These borrowed eyes in my head, you mean?" "Not borrowed. Gifted. The eyes of a dead woman. The eyes of a woman who wanted someone else to see if she couldn't." Hollis drew a breath and let it out slowly. "Yeah, I keep telling myself that. But I wonder what I'll feel like if the eyes do work, and when I look into a mirror, a stranger looks back at me. Still your face, still you. But I'm not who I was the last time I looked into a mirror. I've changed so much. With all that and someone else's eyes as well, how will I even know me?" Hearing and responding to the lost note of pain in the other woman's voice, Maggie leaned forward and put her hand over Hollis's tense one. "You'll know who you are, Hollis. Your mind will look through those eyes." "Will it?" "Yes." Maggie almost withdrew her hand, but then something flashed into her own mind, a quick, sharp image that caused a strange jolt of pain and even an aching sadness. The image was gone before Maggie could identify it, but she was left with the odd and inexplicable feeling that there was someone else here in the room. "I hope you're right," Hollis murmured. Maggie looked around quickly, uneasy, then said, "Hollis, why did you want me to come here tonight?" She felt the hand beneath hers tense even more. "What you said about the paranormal sort of touched a nerve," Hollis said slowly. "I've been more open-minded about it lately because of something that's been happening to me ever since the attack." "What?" Again Maggie felt that flash of something, so vivid that it was almost as though for a split second she caught a glimpse of someone standing just behind Hollis. It was eerie and definitely not anything she had experienced before, yet somehow not really frightening. "I thought it was my imagination at first." Hollis laughed under her breath. "Hell, maybe it is. It started right after the attack. A voice in my mind urging me to keep trying to pull myself out of that building where he'd left me. It knew my name, that voice. It helped give me the will to live. Might even have saved my life. They told me afterward that if I hadn't pulled myself out of the building just then, It probably would have been hours before anyone found me, and I would have been dead.
That doesn't sound like your imagination.
No, I don't think I ever believed that. Not really. She has such a distinctive voice. It's easy to feel she's a separate and distinct personality.
Does she have a name?
Her name is Annie. Annie Graham. It didn't sound familiar to Maggie, and yet it did, somehow. Again she caught that flash of an image, a slight figure standing behind Hollis, and this time thought to herself, dark hair, sad face. But then it was gone. Maggie?
Sorry, I was thinking.
Thinking I'm out of my mind?
No, far from it. Do you know who she is, Hollis? Or who she was?
After a moment, Hollis said, You figured it out more quickly than I did. I guess it's not easy to accept the fact that a ghost is talking to you.
I would imagine not.
I've never had any mediumistic abilities, so I don't know how it feels. Except that she could feel it now. She could feel Hollis's uneasiness and doubt, feel the slight chill of being touched by something inexplicable, the peculiar sensation of gazing into an open corridor linking the living and the dead. Mediumistic? The ability to talk to the dead, I suppose. Odd, somehow, that it has a name. She barely paused before saying, But you do have paranormal abilities, don't you, Maggie? Maggie hesitated, then said, They call what I can do an empathic sense. Empathy. You feel the pain of others, and sometimes you blunt the edges of the hurt or even take some of it away, don't you?
If I can.
Hollis's hand turned suddenly and gripped Maggie's. If I'd known that, I never would have talked to you, never would have forced you to feel so much of what I felt.
I know. That's why I didn't tell you.